In my first life, I was a simp for my cheating wife. I gave Cassidy Beaumont my name, my money, my family's protection, and 8 years of my life. And while I was begging for scraps of affection, she was doing very private yoga sessions with Hudson Waverly, the adopted brother I treated like my own blood. The Waverly family was not normal rich. Our name opened banks, bought judges, and made entire families bow before breakfast. So choosing a wife was never just marriage. It was a power transfer. Whoever wore my ring got access to the Waverly name, the Waverly money, and the kind of protection people killed for. So when I was reborn on the morning I had to choose my bride again, I already knew one thing. I was not choosing Cassidy twice. Cassidy Beaumont was already wearing the white fiancé ribbon when my father asked me to choose my wife. She waited outside the Waverly engagement room like the ending had been printed and delivered. The rule was simple. One sealed selection card decided my wife, the protection hierarchy, and which allied family rose with Waverly Holdings for the next 7 years. 4 guardian candidates had trained beside me. Everyone thought I would write Cassidy. I picked up the pen. Naomi Crest stopped whispering. Riley Fairmont bent over a tiny wager board hidden behind her clutch. I wrote Kira Langford. Then I said, not Cassidy. The room went so quiet I could hear Riley's pen cap hit the floor. Charles Waverly, my father, did not reach for the card at first. He looked from the ink to my face, like maybe his only son had finally learned a useful magic trick. Mr. Beaumont's smile lost power. Not dimmed. Lost power. Kira Langford stood near the window, arms crossed, black jacket sharp enough to hurt feelings. She had been pretending not to care. Her eyes still moved first. Naomi's wager board slid sideways. I saw the columns before she covered them. Cassidy by sunrise. Kira storms out. Hudson cries. Their little casino died on line 1. Naomi tried to wipe the board with her thumb. Riley slapped her hand down. Riley whispered, ink smears. Do not make it obvious. Kira heard them anyway. Kira said, if you bet on Cassidy, pay me before the wedding. Naomi went pink. Riley looked personally attacked by mathematics. I liked Kira better by the second. She did not ask why she was chosen. She attacked the side market first. Charles cleared his throat, and the room remembered the money attached to my pen. Charles said, the sealed card controls 3 things: wife status, first call protection, and alliance priority. Once I seal it, no family revises it without your written withdrawal. Mr. Beaumont jumped on that word. Mr. Beaumont said, withdrawal is still possible then. I looked at him. I said, it is possible for the son to apologize too. Do not build plans around it. Riley made a sound like she had swallowed a laugh sideways. Mrs. Beaumont's pearls trembled again. Every Beaumont in that room had realized the same ugly thing. Cassidy had not lost a boyfriend. She had risked a pipeline. Kira pushed off the window. Kira said, I have not accepted anything. Good. She still had teeth. I said, then reject me loudly. I respect clear failures. Her eyes narrowed. Kira said, tempting. But she did not leave. That mattered. Cassidy would have made me chase her down a hallway. Kira made me stand still and prove I was serious. Charles finally folded the card, slid it into the silver envelope, and sealed it with the Waverly crest. That was the first concrete sound of my second life going right. Riley bent over the wager board again and scratched one frantic arrow from Cassidy's name to Kira's. Naomi whispered, do we owe her now? Kira said, with interest. Mr. Beaumont heard that and went stiff. A joke had just become a financial forecast, and nobody in his family enjoyed math when it pointed down. In my first life, I had written Cassidy's name with a groom's stupid confidence. I had married the woman outside that door. I had fed Beaumont Group with Waverly money, carried her pride, protected her reputation, and died emotionally before my body caught up. After Cassidy's funeral in that life, I opened a locked room in our house. 3 mannequins wore Hudson's old coats. Love letters filled a glass case, all addressed to my adopted brother. Her life insurance named Hudson. Monthly transfers from the accounts I funded had gone straight to him. That was not heartbreak. That was accounting with perfume on it. So when I woke up again on selection day, I did not ask the universe for healing. I asked for a pen. Charles tapped the sealed card once. Charles said, Asher, you understand what this moves? I understand exactly, I said. Mrs. Beaumont sat beside her husband with both hands folded over her pearls. The pearls stopped moving. That was how I knew she had stopped breathing properly. Mr. Beaumont tried to laugh. Mr. Beaumont said, Kira is capable, of course, but Cassidy has always been your favorite. Favorite is not a contract, I told him. Naomi made a tiny noise behind her hand. Riley kicked her under the table. The wager board vanished into Riley's clutch like evidence at a bad trial. Kira looked at me then. Her left hand brushed the old scar across her knuckles, the one she got years ago pulling me out of a training fall Cassidy had called my fault. She did not mention it. Kira rarely advertised loyalty. She just kept receipts in bone, not soft. Never soft, Kira said. Did you hit your head before breakfast? That was Kira. Give her wife status and she would still check for brain damage first. I told Kira, no, I just got tired of bad investments. Her mouth twitched. One corner. Half a smile, half a warning. Cassidy's voice floated from the corridor before anyone could answer. Cassidy said, "Is it finished yet?" She did not knock. Cassidy had never knocked when she thought a room belonged to her. The door opened 2 inches, the white ribbon on her dress caught the light. It was pinned over her heart, embroidered with the Waverly crest, because someone in her family had decided subtlety was for people without credit lines. She looked at me first, not the envelope. Of course she did. Cassidy Beaumont had spent years rejecting my attention in public and collecting its benefits in private. She liked my name close enough to protect her. She just did not want me close enough to touch her heart. A brutal arrangement, really. Efficient, evil, very Beaumont. Cassidy smiled like she was being generous. Cassidy said, "Asher, can we speak alone?" Mr. Beaumont's eyes sharpened. He thought his daughter was managing the obsessive heir before the announcement. Too bad for him, the obsessive heir had died already. Charles did not stop me. He slid the sealed envelope into the inner pocket of his jacket. That was enough. The choice was locked. I followed Cassidy into the side gallery. She walked ahead of me, ribbon flashing with every step. Portraits of old Waverly men stared from the walls, probably offended that I had waited an entire lifetime to grow a spine. Cassidy stopped beneath the glass case where our guardian candidate badges were displayed. Cassidy said, "Do not choose me just because everyone expects it." She did not sound nervous. She sounded rehearsed. I leaned against the case. I said, "That is the first useful thing you have told me today." Her smile tightened. Cassidy said, "I mean it. I care about Hudson. You know that. If you force this, all 3 of us suffer." I said, "You mean you suffer publicly?" Her lashes flickered. Cassidy said, "Do not twist my words." I said, "You wore my crest into a Waverly selection and came to warn me not to choose you. Your words arrived twisted." She looked toward the closed door. Cassidy said, "Kira will hate being used like this." I said, "Kira hates most things. At least she is honest about it." Cassidy's voice sharpened. Cassidy said, "You think picking her will make me jealous?" I smiled. I said, "No. I think picking her will make you irrelevant." That one reached bone. Her hand went to the ribbon again, protective and possessive at once. She did not want me. She wanted the proof that I still wanted her. There it was, the holy name, Hudson Waverly, my adopted brother, the permanent bruise in every room. Soft voice, tired eyes, perfect timing. If weakness could wear cufflinks, it would look like him. In my first life, Cassidy had said Hudson needed protection. Then she gave him my money, my marriage, my trust, and the soft parts of her voice. In this life, she was still warning me not to choose her while wearing my fiancé ribbon. Clown behavior with embroidery? I touched the ribbon lightly. She jerked back as if my finger burned. "Good," I said, "take that off." Cassidy blinked. Cassidy said, "What?" I said, "You heard me. That crest belongs to the woman I choose." Her face changed, but not enough. She thought I was angry because she had rejected me. She still believed the slot was hers to refuse. Cassidy said, "Asher, do not be childish." I laughed once. I said, "I chose Kira." That finally landed. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Beautiful. First real silence I had ever enjoyed from Cassidy Beaumont. Cassidy said, "You are lying." I said, "The card is sealed." Cassidy said, "You cannot choose Kira." I looked past her through the gallery glass. Kira was still in the room. Naomi and Riley were both pretending not to stare and failing like amateurs. I said, "I already did." Cassidy's fingers curled around the ribbon. For a second, she looked less like a future bride and more like a thief caught wearing the owner's coat. Then, she found her pride again. Cassidy said, "You will regret embarrassing me." "I regretted marrying you," I said. "This is lighter." She stared as if I had spoken a language she had never needed to learn. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then I remembered the locked room, the mannequin coats, and the money she had sent Hudson with my name still on her ring. Sympathy left the building without a coat. She flinched, not from sadness, from insult. Cassidy could survive my devotion. My mockery apparently needed a warning label. Before she could speak, a thud came from the front hall. Then, a second one. A staff member shouted, "Hudson is down by the east steps." Cassidy turned instantly. Not toward me, toward Hudson, of course. The old script had barely changed costumes. I stepped aside and let her run. She almost collided with Kira at the doorway. Kira caught the edge of the door with one hand and watched Cassidy sprint past us, ribbon still pinned, loyalty already leaking out in public. Kira said, "You sure you picked the right disaster?" Told Kira, "I picked the one who stayed in the room." Her eyes flicked to mine. Then the front hall broke open with noise. Hudson sat on the marble step, one hand pressed to his ribs, face pale in that expensive way he had perfected. A security guard hovered over him. Cassidy dropped beside him and grabbed his shoulders before the guard finished explaining. Hudson said, "I am fine. Do not blame Escher." Nobody had blamed me yet. That was Hudson's favorite trick. He started the defense before the accusation existed, then waited for fools to fill in the crime. Cassidy looked back at me with wet eyes already loading. Cassidy said, "What did you say to him?" Naomi whispered. "Oh no," Riley whispered back. "The board did not have this option." Kira heard them and snorted. Charles came out last. His gaze moved from Hudson to Cassidy's hands, then to the white ribbon still pinned on her chest. Charles said, "Cassidy, remove the ribbon." That got everyone. Mr. Beaumont stepped forward. Mr. Beaumont said, "Charles, surely there is no need to humiliate her in a hallway." I said, "Then she can stop wearing my wife's property in one." Kira coughed once. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Cassidy stared at me. Her hand shook when she unpinned the ribbon. The tiny cloth fell into her palm, and somehow it looked smaller without my future attached to it. I took it from her. I did not give it to Kira yet. Not in that hallway. Kira deserved a cleaner stage and a bigger knife. Cassidy noticed that too. Her chin lifted, like she had found one last scrap of control. Then a shout came from outside the open front doors. A man in work boots pushed through the gate line, one hand buried under his jacket. His face was red, his eyes were fixed on me. A ruined supplier. I remembered him. In my first life, that walk had ended with a knife, Cassidy shielding Hudson, and my body hitting stone before anyone remembered I was the one bleeding. This time, Kira saw me look. Her hand moved toward the glass case before the man cleared the first step. Cassidy still had both arms around Hudson. The selection card was sealed, the ribbon was off, the old attack was walking toward me again. And the woman who used to call herself my protector had already chosen someone else to hold. Cassidy still had both arms around Hudson when the ruined supplier crossed the courtyard. That was the joke of it. She had spent years calling herself my strongest guardian, but the second danger arrived, she wrapped herself around the wrong Waverly like a designer blanket. The rule was simple. If I bled while a sworn guardian protected another man, she answered immediately. No committee, no speech. One visible wound was enough. I said it out loud before the supplier reached the steps. "Cassidy," I told her, "if I bleed while you guard Hudson, do not cry when the contract bites." She looked over her shoulder. Cassidy said, "Stop making everything about you. Hudson can barely stand." Kira was 10 feet away, near the glass display case where the old guardian badges sat. She did not argue. She watched the glass. That was the difference between a performer and a protector. The supplier shouted something about Waverly Holdings ruining him. That was all the biography he earned. His hand came out of his jacket. One knife, one old nightmare. One chance to see who moved. Cassidy dragged Hudson behind her with both arms. She turned her back toward me and made herself a shield for him. Kira moved before the blade flashed. She saw him first in the reflection of the glass case. Her hand shot out, grabbed my sleeve, and yanked me sideways so hard my shoulder hit the display frame. The knife cut air where my ribs had been. The supplier stumbled from the missed strike. His shoulder clipped a pillar, and the blade flashed back toward my stomach. Kira stepped between us. Not Cassidy. Not a guard. Kira. Then Kira slammed the case door into the supplier's wrist. Glass rattled. The knife dropped. Kira kicked it under the marble bench and twisted his arm behind him before the security guards remembered their paychecks. The courtyard stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. The supplier screamed. Kira said, "Next time, lunge slower. Some of us are tired." A ridiculous line. Perfect timing. I almost respected the knife for giving her the setup. Then, I saw blood. Not mine this time. Kira's palm had split against the glass edge. Red ran down her wrist and dripped on the floor near my shoe. In my first life, the knife had caught me because Cassidy pulled Hudson away and no one pulled me. I remembered the sound my body made when it hit stone. I remembered learning to stand with a cane while Cassidy sat beside Hudson's bed and called it duty. This time, Kira bled so I did not. So I paid the right person. "Recovery case," I told the nearest staff member. "The black one from my suite. Bring it to Kira." Cassidy finally looked at my sleeve. There was a small rip where the knife had grazed the fabric. Under it, a thin line of blood opened on my arm. Not deep. Still enough. Her face changed when she realized what the rule meant. Hudson noticed faster. Hudson said, "Asher, please! Cassidy was only scared for me." I looked at him. I said, "I know. That was the problem." Naomi stepped forward, hands raised. Naomi said, "Asher, Cassidy did not know he had a knife." Riley grabbed Naomi's wrist before I answered. Riley's eyes had fixed on the bloodline under my torn sleeve. Riley said, "Quieter, Naomi." She did not look at him. Cassidy heard that and turned on Riley. Cassidy said, "I was protecting family." Kira lifted her injured hand. Kira said, "So was I." Mine bled in the correct direction. That tiny betrayal hit Cassidy harder than the rule. Naomi swallowed. Her defense died in her mouth. Kira let the guards take the supplier. She flexed her injured hand once and gave me a look. Kira said, "You are bleeding." Cassidy said, "It is a scratch." Kira turned her head slowly. Kira said, "From a knife you did not block." Nice. Clean hit. No wasted syllables. Cassidy's cheeks went hot. Hudson tried to stand. He wavered, leaned heavily on Cassidy, and made sure everyone saw him fail. He had the posture of a dying prince and the timing of a bill collector. Cassidy caught him. Of course she caught him. I raised my bleeding arm. Cassidy Beaumont failed the blood rule, I said. Public meal. First call protection removed until I restore it. Mr. Beaumont exploded from the steps. Mr. Beaumont said, "You cannot strip her rank in front of staff." I said, "I can strip it in front of the supplier if you want a wider audience." He shut up. The supplier, face pressed against the courtyard stone by security, actually looked interested. Good for him. Even criminals enjoy quality family theater. Charles did not rescue the scene. He only locked what I had already caused. Charles said, "The agreement stands." Cassidy stared at my father, then at me. A staff member brought the contract tray from the side office. No reading, no debate, just the black velvet square where failed badges went to die. Cassidy saw the tray and finally understood this was not a mood swing. It was a demotion. Cassidy said, "You would punish me after choosing another woman?" I said, "I am punishing you because you were my guardian 10 seconds ago and forgot whose blood mattered." She had no answer. Not a good one. Kira held her bleeding palm away from her jacket and watched Cassidy kneel on the cold marble. No smile, no speech. That made it worse for Cassidy. Kira did not need to gloat, the blood already did it for her. A staff member opened the recovery case beside Kira. Inside were private bandages, pain tablets, a small vial from my doctor, and the hard candy I kept because the tablets tasted like regret. The staff member reached for my arm first. I said, "Her hand first." Kira glanced at me. Kira said, "Trying to look generous?" "No," I said, "trying not to waste medical supplies on the wrong woman." Cassidy's head snapped up. There it was again. She could tolerate losing my love. Losing priority made her twitch. The first public strike was not a whip across skin. I did not need theater that messy yet. The old guardian system had cleaner cruelty. Cassidy had to kneel, remove her badge, and watch Kira receive the recovery case marked for first call protection. The badge sounded tiny when Cassidy placed it on the marble. Tiny things can ruin rich people. Beautiful design. A guard at the archway shifted 2 steps to the left, away from Cassidy's old position and closer to Kira. I pointed at the second guard. "Mirror her," I said. "If Kira moves, you follow. If Cassidy moves, you watch." The second guard obeyed before Charles spoke. That tiny delay mattered. My order landed first. Charles's approval came second. Cassidy saw the hierarchy change in real time. That was the part Cassidy could not stand. Not the kneeling, not the staff watching. The replacement had legs. It moved in real time. Kira noticed the guard too. Kira said, "That side has better lighting anyway." Riley lost another laugh and pretended to cough. Cassidy looked like she wanted to stab the lighting. Riley stared at the badge. Riley said, "So Kira is first call now?" Said, "Kira moved first. The title can catch up." Kira's mouth moved like she wanted to insult me and thank me at the same time. She picked insult. Naturally. Kira said, "Do not make me regret being competent." I told her, "That is the first marital vow I have heard all day." Naomi made another small noise. Riley elbowed her again, but weaker this time. Cassidy noticed every reaction. The favorite guardian had become the girl kneeling on my steps while her rival got bandaged from my case. That was not emotional growth. That was better. That was visible. Hudson's face twisted. For 1 second, the softness slipped, then he stepped forward. Hudson said, "If someone has to lose protection, let it be me." I distracted her. Cute. He was not a guardian. He had no rank to lose. But the courtyard heard sacrifice, and Cassidy heard a trumpet from heaven. Hudson dropped to his knees beside her, too hard, like he wanted bruises with witnesses. Cassidy grabbed his arm. Cassidy said, "Hudson, stop! You are hurt!" I looked at the spot where my blood had reached my cuff. She had not touched my arm once. Kira saw it too. Her bandaged fingers curled around the candy from the recovery case. She held it out to me without looking at Cassidy. Kira said, "Take it before you start looking noble. It does not suit you." I took the candy. It was lemon, bitter first, sweet after. Kira had always remembered the wrong details until they became useful. Hudson watched the exchange and folded harder than his knees required. Hudson said, "Asher, please do not turn Cassidy against me. I have no one else." Mr. Beaumont's face twitched. For a second, the man remembered Hudson was not a Waverly heir. He was a Waverly expense with excellent cheekbones and tragic posture. Mrs. Beaumont saw the same math and looked sick. There it was. A plea shaped like a hook. Cassidy leaned toward him immediately. Cassidy said, "No one is turning me against you." She said it in front of me. In front of Kira. In front of the badge she had just lost because she guarded him instead of me. The courtyard did not need a narrator. Even the marble understood. I unwrapped the candy. I said, "Then keep him." Cassidy stared. Hudson went still. Kira's eyes sharpened, and I knew she heard the threat inside the gift. Keep him did not mean comfort him. It meant live with the consequence. Mr. Beaumont stepped closer to his daughter. Mr. Beaumont said, "Cassidy, stand up, apologize properly to Asher." His voice had lost fatherly warmth. It had gained contract panic. Cassidy rose slowly. Her knees were red from the marble. Her badge stayed on the ground. Cassidy said, "I am sorry you were scratched. Terrible apology. Almost impressive." Kira laughed under her breath. I said, "Apology rejected." Cassidy's eyes flashed. I looked at Charles. 7 days to the wedding? I asked. Charles nodded once. "Then for 7 days," I said. "Cassidy does not stand within arm's reach of me unless Kira is closer." Cassidy looked slapped. Naomi looked at Riley. Riley mouthed, "Kira, closer!" like she was updating the wager board in her soul. Hudson's softness cracked again, only for a blink. He looked at Kira's bandaged hand, then at the recovery case, then at me eating candy from her palm. At the time, I thought he only hated losing Cassidy's attention. I did not yet know how ugly he could get when he lost a stage. Cassidy bent to help Hudson stand. He leaned into her until she forgot the badge completely. Mr. Beaumont saw it and cursed under his breath. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, "Cassidy, your badge!" Cassidy looked down. Too late. Kira had already picked it up with 2 bandaged fingers. Kira said, "Do you want this returned to storage, Asher, or framed as a warning?" She was terrible. I was beginning to enjoy terrible. "Storage," I said. "Warnings should be bigger." Cassidy heard that and went pale. Good, she should have. The supplier was dragged away. The courtyard began moving again, but not back to normal. Normal had died when Kira moved first. Naomi no longer stood beside Cassidy. Riley no longer whispered in Cassidy's favor. Mr. Beaumont watched his daughter like a failing asset. And Hudson, still leaning on her, looked at me with eyes too sharp for a helpless man. By sunset, the wound on my arm had closed under Kira's bandage. By dinner, Cassidy had asked 3 different staff members whether the sealed card could be changed. By midnight, the staff had moved Kira's recovery case into the first call cabinet. Cassidy walked past that cabinet twice. Both times, she pretended not to see her empty slot. The third time, Hudson walked with her, hand on the wall like the estate itself had injured him. Cassidy slowed, probably expecting him to faint near the cabinet and reclaim the room. Kira opened the cabinet in front of both of them and took another lemon candy. Kira said, "Inventory check." Cassidy said nothing. That silence was not peace. It was pressure with lipstick. By dawn, Hudson was on his knees outside my suite. He said he came to apologize. The stairs waited behind him. Hudson Waverly knelt outside my suite with both hands folded like a church statue. The man who had just watched Cassidy lose rank for him now claimed he wanted peace. 7 days remained before the weddings. 1 week. 1 card already sealed. 1 family still pretending denial was a strategy. Hudson lifted his face when I opened the door. Hudson said, "Asher, I am sorry about yesterday. Cassidy only protected me because I was weak." I looked at his hands. Clean nails, pale knuckles. No tremble. He had dressed helplessness very carefully. I said, "You rehearsed that in the mirror." His mouth tightened, then he lowered his voice. Hudson said, "You chose Kira, so stop punishing Cassidy. Let her come to me without making her look cheap." There he was. Not pitiful, not broken. Just greedy with softer lighting. I stepped into the hall and let the door shut behind me. I said, "You want Cassidy?" Hudson looked up too fast. Hudson said, "I love her." I said, "Awful for her but convenient for me." His face twitched. Good. Soft men hate hard jokes. It ruins the costume. A maid crossed the far end of the hall carrying folded towels. She slowed when she saw Hudson kneeling. Everyone in the estate had learned to treat his weakness like weather. Hudson noticed her too. His voice rose, just enough. Hudson said, "Please, Asher, do not take the only person who has ever chosen me." I almost clapped. A clean line. Public enough to wound me, soft enough to bait witnesses. Then he reached for my leg. To anyone else, it looked like a desperate brother grabbing for mercy. To me, it felt like 10 hot hooks digging into my ankle. His nails bit through the sock above my shoe. I looked down. Hudson's eyes were wet. His grip was iron. The maid saw my pant leg pull tight. The maid whispered, "Sir, your ankle." Hudson released me at once. Then he threw himself backward down the stairs. Not fell. Threw. His shoulder hit the rail. His body rolled 3 steps and stopped against the landing with a sound ugly enough to summon half the house. He even timed the groan. Villain theater. Budget tears. Full commitment. Cassidy arrived first because apparently panic gave her wings whenever Hudson hit furniture. She dropped beside him. Cassidy said, "Hudson, what did he do?" Great question. Wrong target. I lifted my pant leg. 10 crescent marks circled my ankle, red and already swelling. The maid stepped forward, face white. The maid said, "I saw Hudson's hand on Asher's ankle." Cassidy did not even turn. Cassidy said, "He was begging. Asher must have kicked him." The maid shut her mouth. That silence told me plenty. In Waverly Estate, truth still needed money before it felt brave. Hudson coughed. "No blood. Big performance." Hudson said, "Do not blame Asher. I lost my balance." There it was again. The apology that accused me better than any insult. Naomi and Riley came running from the side hall. Naomi saw Hudson on the landing and covered her mouth. Riley saw my ankle and did not. "Small shift, useful shift," Riley said. "Those marks are fresh." Cassidy snapped. "Riley, not now." Naomi looked between them and chose the worst possible compromise. Naomi said, "Maybe everyone should calm down." No one calm has ever said that in a useful room. Kira arrived last, which meant she arrived armed with context instead of noise. Her bandaged hand held the recovery case. Her eyes moved from Hudson to Cassidy to my ankle. Kira said, "He grabbed you." Cassidy stood. Cassidy said, "You would believe Asher over Hudson?" Kira smiled then. "Not kindly." Kira said, "I would believe a bruise over a monologue." Riley made the mistake of laughing once. Cassidy heard it. Her face went red. Hudson looked at Riley too. The helpless mask stayed on, but the eyes behind it sharpened. At the time, I could not prove every piece of his act. I did not need to. I had what mattered: his grip, my marks, one maid, and Cassidy choosing blindness in public. That was enough rope. Charles came from the study, robe over his shirt, expression already tired of all of us. Charles said, "What now?" I pointed at Hudson. "He wants Cassidy," I said. Cassidy looked furious. Cassidy said, "This is not about that." "Yes it is," I said. "Yesterday you protected him. Today he begged for you. You both keep making the same request with different injuries." Hudson's face went pale. He had expected denial, rage, maybe a family argument. He had not expected delivery. I turned to Charles. "Book 2 halls at Riverton Grand Hotel," I said. "Same day, same hour. 1 wedding for me and Kira, 1 for Cassidy and Hudson." Then I added the part that made the Beaumonts stop breathing. I said, "If Cassidy refuses to attend, Beaumont Group loses Waverly priority before breakfast. If Hudson refuses, his suite becomes storage." The landing went dead. Then everyone reacted at once. Cassidy said, "What?" Hudson said, "Asher, no!" Mr. Beaumont shouted from below. "Absolutely not!" Mrs. Beaumont whispered. "2 halls?" Like the number itself was a disease. Kira looked at me with narrowed eyes. Kira said, "You are using my wedding as a cage." I looked at her. "I am using my wedding as a wedding," I said. "Their cage comes free." Her mouth twitched again. Cassidy stepped toward me. Cassidy said, "I never agreed to marry Hudson." Hudson's hand froze against the rail. That was the first honest wound he showed all morning. He had wanted her devotion as a shield. He had not expected her to say the shield was embarrassing in public. I almost thanked her for the assist. I looked at Hudson still lying at the landing. "Awkward," I said. "He just threw himself down architecture for you." Riley choked. Naomi whispered, "Riley, stop laughing." Hudson's lips parted. For 1 second, he looked genuinely trapped. There it was. The wrong victory. He had wanted me accused. He had wanted Cassidy softer. He had wanted the house to look at me like the jealous tyrant again. Instead, he got a wedding date. He was cooked, and the oven had valet parking. Charles studied me for a long moment. Then Charles said, 7 days. Riverton Grand Hotel can hold both halls. Mr. Beaumont rushed up the lower steps. Mr. Beaumont said, "Charles, think carefully. A 2nd hall beside Asher's will make our family look like an afterthought." "Then teach your daughter to stop choosing afterthoughts," I said. Cassidy swung toward me. Cassidy said, "You are doing this to humiliate me." Said, "Partly. The truth was rude. I had missed it." Her eyes widened. I continued, "Mostly I am doing it because you keep telling me Hudson is the man you protect. I am just respecting your devotion in public." That hit the landing like a dropped glass. Mr. Beaumont had no comeback because business panic had both hands around his throat. Mrs. Beaumont grabbed Cassidy's arm. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, "Do not provoke him. Waverly priority has already moved once." Mr. Beaumont heard his wife and turned on Hudson with a look sharp enough to cut the staircase. Mr. Beaumont said. Stand up if you can stand. If you cannot, stop creating expensive scenes. Hudson's lips parted. For years, adults had softened around his weakness. One lost alliance slot, and suddenly sympathy had a price tag. He was learning, slowly, painfully, publicly. Cassidy heard that. So did Hudson. Hudson tried to sit up. He winced too hard, then remembered to soften. Hudson said, Asher, I never wanted your place. I crouched one step above him, close enough that only the landing heard me clearly. I know, I said. You wanted my wife, my money, my sympathy, and my silence. My place was just furniture. His eyes flashed. There he was again. Then Cassidy touched his shoulder, and the poor little brother mask dropped back over his face. Kira saw the flash. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the recovery case. That mattered more than a speech. The scene should have ended there. It did not. A staff member came from my suite carrying a box of Cassidy's old gifts. The timing was ugly and perfect. Old framed photos, silk ribbons, a bracelet she had once returned in public but left in my room for storage, a drawer full of little useless shrines to a woman who had never loved me right. Cassidy stared at the box. Cassidy said, You kept those? I said, past tense. She misunderstood on purpose. Cassidy said, So you are preparing the bridal suite. Kira looked at the box, then at me. Her expression said she would break my ankle herself if that was true. I told the staff member, Burn what has no value, store what belongs to Waverly, return nothing to Beaumont. Cassidy's face changed again. Not heartbreak, ownership panic. The staff member carried the box away. Cassidy took one step after it before she caught herself. She did not love the bracelet. She had returned it twice. She loved that I had kept it anyway. Now even that little shrine was being rolled toward a trash fire. Naomi saw Cassidy move and whispered, She wanted him to keep it. Riley whispered back, Of course she did. Free worship has resale value. I looked at Riley. She shut up, but her assessment was not wrong. Kira stepped closer to me. Kira said, Low enough for me but not Cassidy. If I am only here to decorate your revenge, say it now. Fair. Sharp. Dangerous. I liked all three. I said, You saved my life. She saved his pride. That is the whole math. Kira held my gaze a second longer. Then she opened the recovery case, took out a strip of bandage, and knelt in front of my ankle without asking permission. Cassidy watched Kira touch the marks Hudson left. Hudson watched Cassidy watching. That little triangle could have powered the estate for a week. Kira wrapped my ankle tight enough to punish both of us, Kira said. Next time someone kneels, stand farther from the stairs. I said, That your medical advice? Kira said. That is wife advice, temporary until you stop being stupid. Then she pulled the bandage tight enough to make my jaw lock. Kira said, If those posters put the wrong name beside yours, I walk. I said, Then wear comfortable shoes, you will be standing beside me. Cassidy flinched at the word wife. Good. She should get used to pain in small doses before the wedding. Later that afternoon, the estate started eating itself with whispers. 2 weddings, same hotel, same hour, Waverly Air with Kira Langford, Cassidy Beaumont with Hudson Waverly. Naomi and Riley's wager board returned with a new column, Who cries first? Naomi wrote, Cassidy. Riley wrote, Mr. Beaumont. I respected Riley's growth. At dusk, I crossed the back terrace and heard Cassidy's voice near the old drive. She was speaking to Hudson, soft and shaken. Cassidy said, After that rain at Harbor Gate Orphan Home, you promised you would never leave me. Hudson answered, I never will. His voice was gentle. Too gentle. My hand flexed before I could stop it. There was a wrong detail in her memory. One wet night, one scar on my palm. One story Hudson had worn long enough that Cassidy mistook the costume for skin. I did not correct her, not then. Some truths are more useful when they arrive after the liar gets comfortable. Kira found me by the terrace steps. She held out a lemon candy. Kira said, You look like you swallowed glass. I took the candy. Bad habit, I said. I keep listening to people lie. Kira glanced toward Cassidy and Hudson. Kira said, Then stop listening and start planning. So I did. That night, I approved 2 wedding halls, 2 sets of cars, 2 guest lists, and 1 poster order big enough to slap Riverton in the face. The staff member handling the poster draft asked which bride name went beside mine. I said, Kira Langford. He hesitated over Cassidy's name. I said, Put Cassidy beside Hudson, large font, no room for creative misunderstanding. Across the hall, Naomi and Riley went silent. Their wager board had become city infrastructure. No planning montage, no romantic panic, just names, dates, and consequences. The sealed card had started the damage. The posters would make it public. I thought the wedding posters would be the cruelest thing I did that month. I had not yet opened the Beaumont front door. Cassidy climbed into my lead wedding car before the driver could stop her. Her name was not on my posters. That was the whole joke. The rule that morning was simple. 2 ceremonies, 2 halls, 1 city audience. The names on the wedding posters decided public wife status before anyone mumbled vows. Cassidy still thought the car proved the bride. I let her sit across from me. A wedding car was still a car. It did not promise the passenger a name. She wore white, of course, not the Waverly ribbon anymore. Charles had made sure of that. But she had found a pearl clip shaped almost like one, because rich girls do not surrender symbols. They counterfeit them. Cassidy folded her hands in her lap. Cassidy said, "You can still stop this before we arrive." I looked out the window. Hudson's car followed behind us with 3 security guards and 1 adopted brother who had turned staircases into performance art. I said, "Stop what?" Cassidy's mouth tightened. Cassidy said, "Do not pretend. You are angry. I understand that. But marrying Kira beside me and Hudson is cruel." I said, "Correct." She blinked. Most people begged for misunderstanding. I preferred clean service. Cassidy leaned forward. Cassidy said, "Then admit it is revenge." I looked at her pearl clip. I said, "It is a wedding with revenge included. Do not insult the catering." Her face went hot. Good. The morning had barely started and she was already sweating through borrowed confidence. My phone buzzed once. Kira had sent 1 message. "If the posters lie, I leave." No hearts. No flowers. Just a resignation letter with eyeliner. I typed back 1 word. Stand. She did not answer. That was Kira's version of trust. Annoying, sharp, and somehow more valuable than every love letter Cassidy had ever written to Hudson. The Riverton Grand Hotel came into view under white banners and stupid gold ribbons. 2 entrances had been dressed the same, which was the point. Confusion feeds arrogance before it eats it. Cassidy looked at the main doors and softened for half a second. Cassidy said, "Asher, after today, everyone will know you still care." I said, "Everyone will know something." Before she could ask, the car stopped. The crowd outside turned at once. Guests, photographers, Beaumont cousins pretending not to count the Waverly cars, staff carrying flower stands big enough to hide family crimes. Then Hudson stumbled out of the second car. His collar was open, his face was pale, his hand shook around a small blade. There it was, the first wedding gift from the drama department. Hudson pressed the blade near his own throat and shouted, "If Cassidy is forced to marry anyone else, I will not live through it." The crowd gasped. Cassidy screamed, "Hudson, no!" And just like that, she forgot she had ridden in my car. She ran to him in front of everyone. The hotel photographer lifted his phone. A red live stream dot blinked at the corner. Riley Fairmont slapped his wrist down so fast the man nearly photographed his own shoe. Riley hissed, "Do not broadcast this. We were wrong enough privately." Naomi Crest clutched her purse like the old wager board might crawl out and confess. Naomi whispered, "We wrote Cassidy under Asher on every line." Riley whispered back, "Then eat the board." Side chaos with stationery. Riverton High Society deserved nothing less. Mr. Beaumont pushed through the guests, face already shiny with panic. Mr. Beaumont said, "Asher, control this before the whole city misunderstands." I stepped out of the car. I said, "The whole city understands faster than your family." Cassidy had both hands on Hudson now. Cassidy said, "Asher, tell him this is not what it looks like." Hudson's eyes cut toward me over her shoulder. Soft, wet, perfectly aimed. Hudson said, "Brother, please, I cannot watch you take her from me." The crowd shifted. There was the false prediction. Poor Hudson, cruel Asher, beautiful Cassidy trapped between brothers. A cheap script, but cheap scripts work on rich audiences if the costumes are expensive. A hotel coordinator rushed up with 2 clipboards and no survival instinct. The coordinator asked, "Which bride enters the main hall?" Cassidy answered before I could. Cassidy said, "I do." Hudson flinched. "Small, ugly, perfect." Mr. Beaumont nodded too fast. Mr. Beaumont said, "Of course she does. The staff already knows the public expectation." I looked at the coordinator. I told the coordinator, "Never take instructions from a woman standing beside the wrong groom." Cassidy went still. The coordinator looked ready to resign into the nearest flower arrangement. Hudson lifted the blade higher because his first act had not bought enough sympathy. Hudson said, "If you marry Kira just to punish Cassidy, I will disappear from this family." I looked at the photographers, the guests, the blade, the open hotel doors. "You announced disappearance with a crowd and 2 cameras," I said, "not your strongest skill." A few guests laughed before they remembered Hudson was holding a knife. That was the problem with performance. If you overacted, even fear started checking the reviews. Charles arrived behind me and said nothing. He had learned by then that I did not need rescuing from my own trap. Cassidy begged again. Cassidy said, "Asher, if you ever loved me, end this." I almost laughed. She had finally asked for love on the day I brought logistics. Before I answered, a truck backed through the hotel service lane. Not flowers, posters. Massive framed wedding posters wrapped in white cloth rolled down the ramp on brass stands. The timing was disgusting. I loved it. Hudson still had the blade up when the first cloth fell. Asher Waverly and Kira Langford. Kira's name sat beside mine in letters tall enough to ruin a bloodline. The crowd went silent for real this time. Not shocked. Silent. Calculating silent. Then the second cloth dropped. Hudson Waverly and Cassidy Beaumont. Hudson's blade lowered by half an inch. He was standing under a poster proving he had threatened to die because his own bride had arrived. That was not tragedy. That was clown math with catering. Someone in the crowd laughed once and swallowed it too late. The hotel photographer lifted his phone again, slower this time, like even he respected the art. Riley slapped the phone down again. Riley said, "At least wait until I change sides." Naomi whispered, "Can we change sides at a wedding?" Riley said, "People change religions for less." Cassidy did not hear them. She stared at the first poster. Her lips moved around Kira's name, but no sound came out. "Beautiful." Second real silence from Cassidy Beaumont. The collection was growing. Mr. Beaumont grabbed the edge of the poster stand like he wanted to strangle typography. Mr. Beaumont said, "There has been a mistake." I said, "There has been a correction." Mrs. Beaumont looked at Cassidy, then at Hudson, then at the crowd already pointing cameras at both posters. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, "Cassidy, why is your name beside Hudson?" Cassidy looked at me like I had moved gravity. Cassidy said, "You cannot do this." I said, "I did it last week. Today you are just reading." Hudson tried to recover. Hudson said, "Asher, you are humiliating Cassidy because she chose me." "Wrong," I said. "I am honoring her choice, publicly, in large font." His face gray-washed. Kira chose that exact moment to walk out of the hotel side entrance. She was not in a wedding dress yet. Black jacket, loose hair, bandaged hand, eyes on the poster first, then on me. A staff member followed her with a garment bag. I took the bag and unzipped it myself. The custom dress inside was white, clean, severe, and cut for someone who could fight in heels if forced. A fresh Waverly ribbon lay folded against the bodice, not Cassidy's used ribbon. Kira deserved clean ammunition. I held it out. "Kira Langford," I said, "your name is on the poster. Your dress is here. Your exit is still available." Kira looked at Cassidy first, then at Hudson's half-lowered blade, then at the crowd. Kira said, "You made me walk past that circus for a dress?" I said, "I made the circus warm up your entrance." Her mouth twitched. Kira took the ribbon. Kira said, "Pin it straight. If I am going to marry a petty man, I refuse to look like his hostage." The crowd heard her. Cassidy heard her harder. I pinned the ribbon at Kira's shoulder. Kira did not flinch. Cassidy did. Cassidy said, "That symbol was mine." Kira turned, slow and cruel. Kira said, "It was on loan." The return condition was embarrassing. Riley made a strangled noise. Naomi whispered, "Kira is winning the board now." The same coordinator returned with the garment bag and a face full of terror. The coordinator asked, "Should I take the bride to the suite?" Cassidy stepped forward again. Kira lifted one finger. Kira said, "Read the poster before you choose a bride. I hear it is educational." The coordinator looked at the huge letters behind her. Then the coordinator turned toward Kira and almost bowed from pure panic. Cassidy's jaw tightened. That little correction hit harder than it should have. A staff member had just learned Kira first in front of the guests. Kira took the garment bag from the coordinator. Kira said, 5 minutes. If Hudson starts another act, tell him to bleed in rhythm. The photographer needs focus." Then she walked into the bride suite without looking back. Cassidy watched the door close. For one stupid second, she looked like she wanted to follow and argue over a room that no longer belonged to her. Mr. Beaumont caught her wrist. Mr. Beaumont whispered, "Do not lose another public fight." Too late. The day was collecting them. 5 minutes later, Kira returned in the dress. The crowd shifted again, but this time the movement went toward her. The dress was not soft. It was sharp white, clean lines, no princess fog, no begging lace. It looked like it had signed a prenup with a knife. The photographer raised his camera. The photographer said, "Bride, this way." Cassidy turned by reflex. So did Kira. The photographer panicked. Kira looked at Cassidy and said, "He meant the readable one." Guest near the flowers made the mistake of laughing into a glass. Cassidy's face burned. She had been demoted by a poster, corrected by a coordinator, and now outranked by a camera command. That was not a wedding morning anymore. That was a public software update. Mr. Beaumont tried one last rescue by ordering staff to push flower stands in front of Cassidy and Hudson's poster. I said, "Leave them visible. Condolences need labels." The staff obeyed me. Not Charles, not Mr. Beaumont, me. Cassidy watched the order land and swallowed whatever pride had survived the camera. Kira stepped beside me under our names. I offered my arm. She took it without looking down. Kira said, "If you trip me, I become a widow early." Said, "We just married socially. Let the paperwork catch up before murder." I said, "Naomi, the board is dead." Kira said, "No, I want my payout." The crowd laughed for real this time. Not at Kira, at Cassidy. That was the turn. Before this morning, Cassidy was the expected bride, everyone protected with silence. After the posters, she was the woman standing under the wrong name while my real bride charged interest on gossip. Hudson saw the crowd moving away from him and tried one more soft collapse. Hudson said, "Cassidy, I will leave if you want me to." He expected her to grab him. She did not move fast enough. That delay was tiny. It cut him wide open. Mr. Beaumont hissed, "Do not leave. If you leave, we lose both halls and every Waverly guest." There. Sympathy had met the invoice. Hudson's hand dropped from his throat. "So much for dying." I looked at the photographer. "Now you can shoot," I said. The photographer nearly saluted. Charles stepped forward only after the damage landed. Charles said, "The names are correct. The ceremonies proceed." No one argued, not because Charles solved it, because the city had already seen the posters. A hotel coordinator opened both hall doors. The left hall carried Hudson and Cassidy's poster. The right hall carried mine and Kira's. Cassidy turned toward my hall by instinct. I pointed across the corridor. I said, "Wrong door." Her face cracked. Hudson reached for her hand. She let him take 2 fingers, not the whole palm. He noticed. Kira noticed. I absolutely noticed. Kira leaned toward me and said, "If she stares during the vows, I am billing you for emotional labor." I told her, "Send it to Hudson. He wanted her." Kira's laugh was small, sharp, and dangerous. Then she took my arm in front of both families. Cassidy had begged for the scene to end. Too bad for her. The poster reveal was only the payment before the next bill. She still had to walk down Hudson's aisle, stand beside the man she claimed to love, and say vows while Kira held my arm under my name. That was the part that finally made Hudson smile. At the time, I thought he smiled because he had won something. He had not. He was just too arrogant to count the empty chairs waiting behind his door. Cassidy said her vows to Hudson while staring across the hotel corridor at my hall. That should have been the end of her performance. It was not. The vows only trapped her long enough for the guests to choose which marriage mattered. The rule after the posters was simple. Hudson's wife had to acknowledge the superior Waverly couple, or Beaumont lost the access it had been sucking from my devotion for years. No contract lecture, no boardroom sermon, one toast would do it. Cassidy missed her first vow cue. The officiant asked Hudson if he accepted her. Hudson said yes too loudly, like volume could cover poverty. Then the officiant turned to Cassidy. Cassidy was looking through the open doors at Kira. Kira stood beside me under our poster with the fresh ribbon on her shoulder and an expression that said she might marry me or bite me, depending on the catering. I respected the uncertainty. The officiant repeated Cassidy's name. Hudson squeezed her hand. Cassidy finally said, "I do. Late, thin, public." A woman near the aisle whispered, "That sounded like a hostage receipt." Hudson heard it. His smile bent at the corner. Across the corridor, Kira answered her own vow before the officiant finished sounding bored. Kira said, "I do. Continue before he changes another family's tax bracket." The front row laughed. Charles closed his eyes like he was praying for patience and finding none. I leaned toward Kira. I said, "You agreed fast." Kira said, "I hate suspense when I already won." Cassidy watched that line land. Her mouth tightened so hard it probably hurt. Good! She had spent years feeding Hudson with soft words. She could survive one hard sentence. The reception began in 2 halls separated by 1 corridor and a lot of bad choices. At first, guests tried to be polite. They drifted into Hudson and Cassidy's hall, took a canapé, offered a stiff smile, then looked across the corridor where my hall had Waverly flowers, full tables, and people who still had futures. Then the migration began. 1 Beaumont supplier crossed first, then 2 Waverly executives, then a cousin who pretended she needed the restroom and returned with a glass from my bar. A server carried a champagne tray out of Hudson's hall and never came back. Beautiful. Even the beverages picked a side. Hudson stood at his head table watching seats empty one by one. He tapped his glass for attention. Hudson said, "Thank you all for honoring our marriage." 3 guests stood up mid-sentence. 1 actually carried his salad across the corridor. That man had no shame and excellent instincts. A waiter leaned toward Mr. Beaumont and whispered, "Should we move the extra place settings?" Mr. Beaumont hissed, "No." I heard because he was loud when terrified. Kira looked at the abandoned tables. Kira said, "Leave them. Empty chairs are the honest guests." Hudson's hand tightened around the glass. Cassidy sat beside him in white, hands folded, eyes fixed on my hall. Mr. Beaumont's smile collapsed in stages. Mrs. Beaumont touched Cassidy's shoulder. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, "Stop staring." Cassidy whispered back, "I am not." She was. Everyone with functioning eyes knew it. Naomi and Riley stalled at the corridor between both halls with the panic of women choosing between friendship and survival. Naomi said, "Cassidy will hate us if we sit with Asher." Riley said, Fairmont Security gets calls from Waverly, not from Hudson's sad appetizer table. Naomi looked offended. Riley added, Crest family office likes breathing too. Naomi stared at the emptying hall. Then she said, we can stand in the corridor. Kira saw them from my table. Kira said, coward seating, bold innovation. Riley heard and walked straight into my hall. Naomi followed because shame moves faster in pairs. Music started in Hudson's hall a minute later. Hudson offered Cassidy his hand for the first dance. She looked past him first, not at the floor, not at the musicians, at my hall. His hand stayed in the air long enough to become furniture. Kira saw it and hooked 2 fingers into my sleeve. Kira said, one turn, do not get sentimental, I am only weaponizing rhythm. So I stood with her under our poster. We made 1 slow turn, clean and short. Guests clapped from my hall. Hudson's hand dropped. Cassidy saw that too. Her friends had not abandoned her loudly. Worse, they had done it sensibly. Hudson lifted his glass for the first toast, probably hoping alcohol could rescue status. Then Kira's phone rang. The screen showed Langford Capital. She reached to silence it. I caught her wrist. Answer, I said. Speakers exist for violence. Kira gave me a look. Kira said, you are a terrible influence. I said, marriage should improve one of us. She put the call on speaker. A calm assistant's voice filled our table. The assistant said, congratulations, Mrs. Waverly. Langford Capital confirms the alliance priority is active under your signature. 1 line, no meeting, no mechanics, just a trophy dropped in public. Kira looked across the corridor at Cassidy. Kira said into the phone, tell my family the groom is less embarrassing than expected. I said, high praise. Kira said, do not get greedy. My hall laughed. Hudson's hall heard it and died a little more. Mr. Beaumont's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. Then again. Each vibration pulled more blood out of his face. He looked at Cassidy like she had personally set fire to Beaumont Group's oxygen supply. Mr. Beaumont grabbed her wrist and dragged her to her feet. Cassidy hissed. Dad, what are you doing? Mr. Beaumont said, saving what you have not ruined yet. Hudson rose too. Hudson said, Mr. Beaumont, Cassidy is upset. Mr. Beaumont turned on him. Mr. Beaumont said, then be useful and look married. Hudson froze. That line hit harder than any slap I could have thrown. Hudson had wanted Cassidy as proof of value. Her father had just called him furniture with vows. They crossed into my hall together. The guests parted, not out of respect. Curiosity. Nothing feeds rich people like a public demotion with dessert service. Cassidy stopped in front of my table. Kira lifted her glass before Cassidy spoke. Kira said, careful, this hall has witnesses and better lighting. Cassidy's eyes flashed. I stood. I said, Hudson's wife owes the elder Waverly couple a toast. Cassidy stared at me. Cassidy said, do not call me that. Hudson's face went gray. I smiled. I said, what? Wife? Her fingers dug into the stem of her glass. I said, that is the word you chose when you protected him, begged for him, and ignored my blood for him. Do not get shy now. Mr. Beaumont squeezed her wrist. Mr. Beaumont said, say the toast. Cassidy looked from him to me. Cassidy said, you cannot make family respect happen with a toast. No, I said, but I can make Beaumont access disappear without one. That did it, not the shame, not the guests, not Hudson's wounded stare, the access. Mrs. Beaumont appeared behind Cassidy, pale and sharp. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, Cassidy, say it. Kira leaned back in her chair. She was enjoying herself too much. I approved. Cassidy lifted her glass. Her hand shook once. Cassidy said, to Asher, my brother-in-law through Hudson. I tapped the table. I said, again, less legal, more family. Her eyes went wet with fury. Good. Tears season humiliation. They do not erase it. Cassidy swallowed. Cassidy said, to Brother Asher. The room tightened. Then she looked at Kira. Her voice dropped. Cassidy said, and to Kira, my sister-in-law. Kira drank first. She did not smile until the glass left her mouth. Then Kira said, welcome to the family, Cassidy. Try not to flirt upward. The hall exploded. Not polite laughter. Cruel laughter. The kind that teaches a woman her old rank has been repossessed. Hudson's knuckles whitened around his glass. He had gotten the woman he claimed to love, and now she was publicly honoring the couple she could not stop watching. He was cooked again, medium rare, socially. Naomi covered her mouth. Riley whispered, that line is going on the board. I said, burn the board. Riley said, after I collect. Kira heard that and crooked one finger. Naomi and Riley came over like students called to the principal's office, except the principal had just stolen the groom's seating chart. Kira said, board. Riley surrendered the tiny wager board from her clutch. Kira read the old column naming Cassidy as my bride, clicked her tongue, and drew one clean line through it. Under it, she wrote, Kira wins. Then she held out her hand. Naomi whispered, you want payment now? Kira said, public wrongness earns public interest. Riley paid first. Naomi paid second and looked like each folded bill had betrayed her personally. Cassidy watched her friends pay my wife for predicting Cassidy's collapse. That was not a side joke anymore. It was an allegiance receipt. Kira handed the board back to Riley. Kira said, "Next column, who apologizes first?" Naomi looked at Cassidy across the hall and did not write her name. That was worse than betrayal. That was market research. Cassidy set her glass down too hard. A drop of wine hit the tablecloth. Kira looked at the stain. Kira said, "Careful, that linen is probably still above Hudson's budget." Hudson stepped forward. Hudson said, "Kira, enough!" Kira turned her head. Kira said, "Do not correct my tone in my husband's hall. My husband." Cassidy flinched. I did not miss it. Neither did Hudson. His face tightened with a new kind of fear. Before today, he had only competed with my old obsession. Now he was looking at a wife who claimed her place out loud and enjoyed the knife going in. Charles finally lifted his glass. Charles said, "To my son and his wife." He looked only at me and Kira. That locked the room harder than any contract line. Cassidy tried to step closer to my chair. Cassidy said, "Asher, can we talk somewhere private?" Kira set her glass down before I moved. Kira said, "No, married women asking my husband for privacy need a better hobby." Cassidy's lips parted. Hudson looked at her so sharply even Naomi noticed. Naomi whispered, "She asked in front of her husband." Riley whispered back, "The board needs a scandal column." I looked at Hudson. "Control your wife," I said. Hudson flinched like the word wife had teeth. Cassidy flinched because I gave her to him out loud. Kira smiled because she was evil in the correct direction. That made the hierarchy audible. Guests raised glasses, some from my hall, some from the corridor. A few from Hudson's nearly empty hall, because people love survival when it comes with champagne. Cassidy did not drink. Mr. Beaumont forced her glass up with his own hand. That was the final public cut. She had come to the hotel expecting to be the woman everyone begged for. She left as Hudson's wife, Beaumont's liability, and Kira's new sister-in-law. A downgrade with flowers. The reception fell apart after that. Hudson tried to pull Cassidy back to their hall. Cassidy let him, but she looked over her shoulder at me twice before they reached the corridor. Kira saw both looks. She slid her hand into the crook of my arm. Kira said, "If you enjoy being stared at by married women, I can arrange a medical evaluation." I said, "Jealous?" Kira said, "Territorial. Jealous sounds like I am competing." There it was again, not soft, better than soft. Cassidy left the hotel before dessert. Mr. Beaumont shoved Hudson into the same car with her like he was loading a bad investment into storage. At the red light outside the hotel, Cassidy looked back through the rear window. She saw my car following. For the first time all day, she smiled. Small, shaky, hungry. She thought the toast had worked. She thought I had followed because humiliation had softened into regret. Kira saw the smile too. Kira said, "Tell me we are not chasing her feelings." I leaned back against the seat. "No," I said. "We are chasing my property." Kira's eyes brightened. "Finally," she said, "a romantic errand." Cassidy kept smiling until we reached the Beaumont home. She did not see the second vehicle turn behind us. That was fair. Moving trucks are quieter when they come for your delusions. Cassidy smiled when my car stopped outside the Beaumont home. Then the moving truck parked behind me. Her smile died so fast I almost tipped the driver. The rule that night was simple. Gifts accepted under false affection returned to the man who paid. Waverly benefits were no longer automatic, just because Cassidy had once enjoyed being worshipped. One truck, one house, dozens of objects, no receipts needed. The furniture knew me. The truck driver lowered the ramp and asked, "Front entrance or side entrance?" I looked at the Beaumont front steps, the open gate, the neighbors pretending not to breathe. "Front," I said. Cassidy's eyes widened. Mr. Beaumont said, "Use the side." Said, "You used my name at the front door for years. The furniture can leave the same way." The driver nodded like he had finally found a client with taste. Cassidy stood on the front steps in her wedding dress, Hudson behind her with the expression of a man realizing vows did not come with inventory. Mr. Beaumont opened the door before the bell rang. Mr. Beaumont said, "Asher, this is inappropriate on a wedding night." I looked past him at the living room I had funded piece by piece. "Correct," I said. "I paid extra for inappropriate." Kira stepped out beside me, still wearing the Waverly ribbon over her changed jacket. Cassidy's eyes went straight to it. Kira noticed. Kira said, "Still looking? Careful. Sister-in-law sounds worse when you drool." Cassidy's face tightened. Hudson said, "Kira, do not mock her in her own home." I looked at the movers. I told the movers, "Start with the vase." Hudson blinked. That was the first mistake. Thinking this was conversation. Two movers entered the Beaumont living room and lifted the blue and white gallery vase from the corner pedestal. Mrs. Beaumont gasped like they had grabbed a child. Mrs. Beaumont said, "That was a housewarming gift." From me, I said. Cassidy stepped forward. Cassidy said, you gave it to my family. I said, I gave it to the family I thought I was joining. I joined another one today. Kira looked at the vase. Kira said, good. It was wasted beside those curtains. Mrs. Beaumont looked wounded by the curtain slander. Rich people are fascinating. Remove a $40,000 vase and they mort upholstery. Hudson tried to laugh. Hudson said, it is just a vase. I can replace it. What was it, 2,000? Kira turned slowly. Kira said, 40,000 before auction fees. Hudson's laugh died. Mrs. Beaumont turned on him. Mrs. Beaumont said, you cannot even price the thing you stand beside? Hudson went pale. Off by a factor of 20 on the first object. Strong opening. Terrible husband. A maid by the hallway froze with a stack of napkins in her arms. Two neighbors appeared beyond the front gate, pretending to admire the hedges. One neighbor walked a dog past twice. The dog looked embarrassed for everyone. Public shame had arrived on 4 legs. Mr. Beaumont stepped in front of the movers. Mr. Beaumont said, you cannot strip my home because my daughter hurt your pride. I am not stripping your home, I said. I am correcting the ownership story. I pointed to the dining room. I said, the table goes next. Cassidy made a small sound. That table had hosted Waverly dinners, Beaumont fundraisers, birthday toasts where I sat beside Cassidy while she looked at Hudson across candles. 6 men carried it out through the front doors. The neighbors stopped pretending. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, people are watching, Kira said. That is usually why people buy windows. Riley would have written that on the board. Shame she was not there. Or maybe mercy existed in one narrow corner of the world. Cassidy followed the table down the steps. Cassidy said, you kept score of every gift? I said, no. I kept giving until the house started looking like my apology. 1 line, then the table hit the truck ramp. Thunk. Better than therapy. Hudson moved closer to Cassidy. Hudson said, let him take things. We do not need his scraps. Mrs. Beaumont spun on him so fast her pearls slapped her collarbone. Mrs. Beaumont said, those scraps seated your wedding guests before they left. There it was. The Beaumont family had turned on romance in under 12 hours. Love is patient. Contract panic is faster. The movers took a pair of framed gallery pieces next, then the silver serving cart. Hudson tried to regain dignity by pointing toward the west wall. Hudson said, leave anything I gave her. We are not beggars. I raised one hand. I said, fine. Do not touch anything Hudson bought. The movers stopped. Nobody moved. 6 full seconds passed. The silence was so brutal, even the dog at the gate stopped panting. Mrs. Beaumont looked around her own living room. Mrs. Beaumont said, nothing? Hudson's throat worked. I said, apparently your husband's love travels light, Cassidy. Kira looked at the empty wall. Kira said, very efficient, no truck required. Hudson's face went from pale to paper. Then the movers took the custom couch Cassidy had once called, too cold in my suite, and perfect in her mother's living room. Each object left with 1 sentence from me. No catalog, no debate, just origin, removal, humiliation. Kira leaned close while the couch went out. Kira said, you had terrible taste when you were in love. I said, I was poisoned. Kira said, you bought that couch sober. I said, then poisoned and unsupervised. Her mouth twitched. Cassidy heard the exchange and looked between us. The jealousy landed before she could hide it. Good. She had watched me fund her house for years. Now she had to watch my wife roast my taste while movers carried the proof away. A mover brought out 3 polished wellness crates from a side room. Gold labels. Velvet straps. The absurd kind of health gift rich families display until it expires quietly. Behind them came a small locked tea cabinet I had sent after Cassidy once complained the Beaumont staff served cheap blends when Waverly guests visited. Cassidy stepped toward that cabinet too. Cassidy said, that stays, my mother uses it. Mrs. Beaumont did not deny it. She actually touched the key at her wrist. I said, then your mother can use whatever Hudson bought. The room turned toward Hudson again. Nothing happened. The man was becoming a recurring absence. Kira whispered, at this point I almost respect the consistency. Mrs. Beaumont lunged. Mrs. Beaumont said, those are for Cassidy's recovery. Kira looked at the crates. Kira said, from what? Consequences? The nearest mover coughed into his shoulder. I said, load them. Cassidy's voice sharpened. Cassidy said, you cannot take medicine. They were not medicine, I said. They were tribute. Bad tribute. Very overpriced. Hudson muttered, this is beneath you. I looked at his suit. I said, hilarious sentence from a man wearing my tailor's pity. His jaw locked. Cassidy stepped between us. Cassidy said, do not talk to him like that. Kira's eyes flicked to me. She wanted to see if I would still react to Cassidy defending him. I did. I smiled. Protect him harder, I said. It makes the next truck cheaper. Cassidy looked confused for half a second. Then she understood. The more she chose Hudson, the less room she had to claim. My heart, my money, or my name. Mr. Beaumont understood first. Mr. Beaumont said, "Cassidy, stop speaking. That was fatherly love in a collapsing asset class." A staff member carried down a box of old framed photos from the upstairs sitting room. Cassidy moved toward it. Cassidy said, "Those are mine." I took the top frame before she could. It was a photo of me standing behind her at a charity dinner, her head turned away, Hudson reflected in the window behind us. A perfect old life summary, honestly. 3 people in one frame and only one idiot looking at the woman. I handed the frame to the mover. "Glass breaks easily," I said. "Wrap it or smash it. I do not care." Cassidy's eyes filled then. Not when she called Kira sister-in-law, not when the hall emptied. When the shrine left the wall, she loved being loved more than she ever loved me. I did not say it. The wall said it for me by going bare. Hudson reached for her shoulder. This time she shrugged him off. Tiny movement, huge problem. Hudson's hand hung in the air, useless and witnessed. Mrs. Beaumont saw it. Mr. Beaumont saw it. Kira saw it and gave me the smallest look. The house had started returning more than furniture. It was returning truth. The last object was the narrow cabinet beside the fireplace. Before the movers touched it, Mr. Beaumont made one final mistake. Mr. Beaumont said, "Name a number." That was the funniest thing he had said all night. A man only offers money when he has already lost the object. I said, "You had years to name a number. You chose my devotion because it was cheaper." His face tightened. Kira did not look at him. Kira looked at me. For once, she did not joke. Then the movers reached for the cabinet. Cassidy stepped in front of it. Cassidy said, "No, not that." Inside were little pieces from years of my idiocy. A bracelet she returned in public. A fountain pen she accepted in private. A pair of crystal birds she said looked lonely, so naturally I bought both. Past me needed supervision and maybe a helmet. I looked at Kira. Kira said, "If you keep the birds, I annul us in spirit." "Load the cabinet," I told the movers. Cassidy grabbed the door handle. Cassidy said, "You cannot take back feelings." "No," I said, "just the expensive containers." The movers lifted the cabinet with her hand still on it. She let go before the neighbors saw her dragged with it. Smartest thing she had done all day. The truck filled fast. The Beaumont living room looked bigger empty. Poorer, too. A Waverly courtesy driver walked up the steps with a black key fob in his palm. For years, that car had waited outside the Beaumont home whenever Cassidy wanted to be treated like my future wife without actually being one. The driver did not offer the key to Cassidy. He handed it to me. Cassidy stared at the empty space where her convenience used to stand. Small loss, sharp edge. Mr. Beaumont stood in the doorway with both fists clenched. Mr. Beaumont said, "What do you want from us now?" "Nothing," I said. That scared him worse than a demand. Demands leave room to bargain. Nothing means the market closed. Cassidy came down the front steps, her dress dragged over the stone. The hem had picked up dust from chasing furniture. Very bridal, very haunted estate sale. Cassidy said, "You followed me just to take things?" I said. Hope flashed across her face. Fast, stupid, alive. I reached inside my jacket and took out a plain envelope. I said, "I also brought you a question." Hudson went still. He had no reason to fear an envelope yet. Or maybe he did. At the time, I could only see the pause. I handed the envelope to Cassidy. She opened it with angry fingers. The photograph inside was old and rain-stained at the edges. Harborgate Orphan Home stood in the background. A drenched boy carried a soaked girl through the storm. His face was half turned from the camera, but his left palm showed a scar. My scar. Cassidy stared at the photo. The color left her face in a slow, satisfying drain. She looked at my hand, then at Hudson. Hudson said too quickly, "That could be anyone." Kira's eyes sharpened. I smiled. I said, "Then you should be calm." Cassidy's fingers curled around the photograph until the corner bent. Cassidy whispered, "Hudson?" He looked at her like he was already choosing which lie to wear. Good. The house was empty enough for the truth to echo. I opened the car door for Kira. She got in, then looked back at the bare Beaumont living room. Kira said, "Nice place, needs furniture and fewer parasites." I handed the driver the address for the Waverly estate. The moving truck pulled away first. Cassidy stayed on the steps holding the photo, her wedding dress dusty, her new husband silent beside her, and her parents looking at him like he had become the most expensive object I left behind. That was the payoff. The truck took back the worship. The photo left the lie. I thought the photograph would make Cassidy hate Hudson. I was wrong. It made Hudson stop pretending faster. Cassidy came back to the Waverly estate before breakfast with Hudson's ring on her finger and my photograph in her fist. That was the funny part. She had been married for 3 days. She looked like she had spent all 3 interrogating paper. The rule that morning was simple. One photograph could crack a childhood promise, one retired trainer could make the crack public. And if Hudson lied, Cassidy's whole marriage had been built on stolen credit. No investigation, no file, no polite waiting room. Breakfast would do. Charles sat at the head of the table with coffee in one hand and disappointment in the other. Kira sat beside me, bandaged hand around a lemon candy she had stolen from the recovery case. Naomi and Riley had come for the Guardian review. Charles had demanded after the stairs. Naomi saw Cassidy first. Naomi whispered, "She still has the ring on." Riley whispered back, "For now." Kira heard them and smiled into her cup. Cassidy stopped at the end of the table. Hudson came in behind her wearing the expression of a man who had slept beside trouble and called it love. Cassidy lifted the photograph. Cassidy said, "Who carried me through the rain at Harper Gate?" Hudson's hand twitched. "Tiny, fast, useful." I leaned back. I said, "Good morning to you too, sister-in-law." Her jaw tightened. Cassidy said, "Answer me." Kira set her candy down. Kira said, "That tone works better when you are not standing in another woman's breakfast room." Cassidy ignored her. Of course she did. Cassidy had spent years ignoring the person who actually moved when danger came. A breakfast server froze with a coffee pot between Charles and me. He had the survival instinct of a candle in wind. Charles took the pot from him. Charles said, "Leave before someone weaponizes breakfast." The server fled, Riley muttered. "Too late." Before Cassidy spoke again, the server she had chased through the hall peeked back inside. The server said, "Hudson's wife asked which staff trained at Harper Gate." Cassidy whipped toward him. Cassidy said, "Do not call me that." Kira lifted one eyebrow. Kira said, "Which part? Hudson's wife or Waverly by accident?" The server wisely vanished again. That tiny title did damage. Cassidy had arrived chasing old romance. The staff had answered with her new husband. Cassidy slapped the photograph onto the table. The room bent toward it. Harbour Gate Orphan Home in rain. A soaped girl in a boy's arms. A scar visible on the boy's left palm. My scar. Hudson looked at the photograph and smiled too softly. Hudson said, "Cassidy, you are upset. Asher is using old images to confuse you." Kira said, "Images do that when they show things." Naomi made the mistake of breathing out a laugh. Cassidy turned on her. Cassidy said, "Do you think this is funny?" Riley answered before Naomi could fold. Riley said, "I think asking your husband if he stole a rescue story at breakfast is not boring." Naomi stared at Riley like she had grown a spine on company time. Hudson's smile thinned. He said, "That could be anyone." I lifted my left hand and opened my palm. The scar crossed the base of my thumb, pale and curved. I had gotten it on a broken window frame the night I carried Cassidy out of Harbour Gate. I had bled through my sleeve before anyone found bandages. Cassidy stared at it. For 1 second, she looked 12 again. Then Hudson reached for her shoulder. Hudson said, "Do not let him rewrite your memories. I was there for you. I always was." There was the overreach. Not, "I remember." Not, "Ask me." He jumped straight to, "Always." Liars love big words. They hide gaps under blankets. Cassidy bent over the photo. Cassidy said, "What window did you carry me through?" Hudson blinked once. Cassidy said, "You told me the side gate for years. The photo shows the south window." His mouth opened. Nothing clean came out. Hudson said, "You were feverish. I did not want to scare you with details." Riley whispered, "Details are scared of him too." Naomi hid her arm under the table. Cassidy asked one more question. Cassidy said, "Which hand was cut?" Hudson lifted his right hand first. Then he saw my left palm open on the table. Too late. His hand drifted down like it had resigned. That was the wind-up the room needed. The lie had not collapsed yet, but it was wobbling in expensive shoes. Before Cassidy could answer, the retired trainer walked into the breakfast room. He had trained all 4 Guardian candidates until his knees gave out and his temper did not. Charles had asked him to look at my ankle after Hudson's stare performance. The man came for bruises. The photograph did the rest. He stopped dead behind Cassidy. The trainer said, "Where did you get that?" Hudson went still. Cassidy turned. Cassidy said, "You recognize it?" The trainer did not look at Hudson. He looked at my hand. The trainer said, "I wrapped that palm. Asher cut it, dragging you through the south window at Harbour Gate. He would not let go of you until the storm door shut." The room did not gasp. "Better." The room recalculated. Naomi's eyes went wide. Riley stopped smirking. Charles put his coffee down with the care of a man saving China from violence. Cassidy's face emptied. Hudson said, "You are mistaken. It was raining. Everyone was panicking." The trainer finally looked at him. The trainer said, "You were under the porch crying into a blanket. I remember because you bit me when I told you to move." Riley choked. Kira covered her mouth with 2 fingers. "I did not." I laughed once. Hudson, the tragic rain hero, had just been demoted to porch goblin with teeth. He was cooked before the eggs cooled. Cassidy grabbed the back of a chair. Cassidy said, Hudson, tell me he is lying. Hudson reached for softness again. He knew the costume. He had worn it for years. Hudson said, I was a child. I was scared. I never meant to hurt you. Wrong answer. Cassidy heard it too. Her hand moved to the ring. Hudson stepped closer. Hudson said, Cassidy, you loved me before you knew any of this. Do not let one scar destroy us. Kira said, One scar? Bold. That scar is carrying your marriage on its back. The trainer nodded once, ugly and satisfied. Charles nearly choked on a second coffee when Cassidy looked at me. Cassidy said, Asher, then it was you. You saved me. You knew. I said, I knew before you married him. You just never asked the right man. She flinched. Good. Truth should not arrive padded. Cassidy whispered, Why did you not tell me? I looked at Hudson. I said, Because last time I spent a life proving I loved you. You still built a shrine to him. Kira's fingers paused around the candy. That was one wound line. Enough. The room had already seen the knife. Cassidy's eyes filled. Cassidy said, Last time? I let that question die. Rebirth was mine, not a group project. Hudson tried to grab the photograph. Riley moved first and pinned it under her palm. Riley said, Nope, evidence stays where the liar can see it. Naomi stared at Riley again. Naomi said, When did you become brave? Riley said, When the board started paying. Side chaos, but useful. The photo stayed on the table. Cassidy yanked the ring from her finger. Hudson said, Cassidy, wait. She dropped the ring into his coffee. The little gold band hit the cup with a soft clink. Tiny sound. Huge divorce energy. Cassidy said, I want out. Hudson's face broke. Not into grief, into insult. He looked from the ring, to me, to the trainer, and for 1 second the poor brother mask fell off the bone. Hudson said, You said I was your whole world. Cassidy said, I said that to the boy who carried me. Hudson's hand closed around the coffee cup until his knuckles whitened. Charles spoke before the cup broke. Charles said, Cassidy Beaumont, you married Hudson 3 days ago in front of both families. Do not bring marital trash to my breakfast and expect my son to recycle it. Naomi whispered, Charles is awake, awake. Kira whispered back, Finally. Cassidy ignored everyone again and came toward me. She did not walk like Hudson's wife. She walked like the woman who had found an old receipt and wanted a refund. Cassidy said, Asher, we can fix this. We made a mistake. Kira stood before Cassidy reached my chair. The room tightened. Cassidy looked at Kira like she had forgotten the obvious problem. Kira was not a placeholder. Kira was my wife. Cassidy said, Kira, please, you know he chose you because of me. Kira smiled. Kira said, He chose me after you chose a porch biter. Try not to sound robbed. Hudson's face twitched. Cassidy reached past Kira for my hand. Kira slapped her. Clean. Fast. Loud enough to make the coffee ripple. Cassidy staggered 1 step. Naomi covered her mouth. Riley did not. Riley looked like she wanted the replay. Kira said, Do not reach for my husband with Hudson's ring mark still on your finger. Wash the failure off first. Cassidy touched her cheek. For once, she had no line ready. I stood. I said, Kira did not steal your place. You abandoned it. Cassidy looked at me with wet fury. Cassidy said, You loved me. I did, I said. Terrible era, would not recommend. Riley made a strangled sound. Even the trainer looked down to hide a smile. Cassidy's face crumpled. Hudson saw it and panicked harder. Hudson said, Cassidy, he is humiliating you again. Come with me, we can leave. She did not turn toward him. That was the payoff that hurt him most. Not the photo, not the trainer, not the ring and coffee. She simply stopped answering when he called. Hudson stepped forward, and Charles lifted 1 finger. Charles said, Do not stage another fall in my dining room. The floor is expensive. Kira laughed into her cup. Hudson stared at Charles like the world had betrayed its favorite orphan. No, brother, the world just read the poster. Cassidy wiped her cheek. Cassidy said, Asher, look at me. Tell me you do not feel anything. I did look. I saw the woman from my first life, the white funeral flowers, the locked room, the mannequin coats, the transfers, the letters, the years I had spent loving a shadow she had pointed at the wrong man. Then I looked at Kira. Bandaged hand, sharp mouth, lemon candy, the woman who moved before the knife. I said, I feel grateful I married better. Kira's expression changed for half a second. Not soft. Worse. Real. Cassidy saw it and broke another way. She turned back to Hudson then, but only because she needed somewhere to aim pain. Cassidy said, You lied to me for years, Hudson said. I gave you what you needed. There it was. Spoken. Owned. The trainer swore under his breath. Charles pushed the coffee cup away from the soaked ring. Charles said, Hudson, even if I were deaf, that sentence would still smell rotten. Naomi stared at Charles like she had never heard an old money patriarch say smell. Kira said, He is adapting, Riley whispered. That sounded less romantic out loud. Naomi said, Riley. Riley said. Am I wrong? No one answered because she was not. Hudson realized his mistake and tried to retreat into tears. Too late. Cassidy picked up the soaked ring from his coffee and threw it at his chest. It bounced off his shirt and hit the floor near his shoe. No one bent to pick it up. Beautiful. A marriage can survive many things. Public floor jewelry is rarely one of them. Charles said. Breakfast is over. Hudson, take your wife home before she damages my table. Cassidy, if you return to this estate, you enter as Hudson's wife or not at all. That was not Charles solving the scene. The damage was done. He only locked the door after we burned the bridge. Cassidy looked at me one last time. Cassidy said, you will forgive me. You always do. Kira stepped closer to my side. I said, wrong lifetime. That one hit everybody. Naomi inhaled sharply. Riley stopped moving. Hudson stared at me like he had heard a language he wanted to bury. Cassidy turned toward the door with the photograph still in her hand. Hudson started after her, but Naomi picked up the coffee-stained ring with a napkin and held it out toward him. Hudson stopped. He did not take it. Riley said, that is awkward. Even the ring needs a guardian. Kira plucked it from the napkin and dropped it into Hudson's empty saucer. Kira said, take your property. My table is not storage for failed symbols. Hudson took it then, not because he wanted the ring, because everyone watched him obey my wife. That was another little step down the ladder. He felt it. Then Cassidy kept walking, and Hudson followed 2 steps behind. Tiny distance. Brutal meaning. Before breakfast, he was her wounded husband. After breakfast, he was the man she did not turn toward when truth hurt. At the door, Hudson looked back at the table, not at Cassidy. At me. His hand closed around the coffee-stained ring until the skin over his knuckles went white. He did not cry this time. That was when I should have worried. A helpless man begs. Hudson had stopped begging. Hudson stopped crying after the breakfast lie collapsed. That should have bothered me more. Instead, the next explosion arrived wearing birthday candles. Naomi invited me to the Ember Room 3 nights later for what she called a small apology dinner, and Riley called a birthday reset. Kira was across town with Langford Capital for one night, cleaning up the alliance mess our wedding had made delicious. So the trap smelled cheap before I opened the door. The rule was simple. A married woman confessing love to another woman's husband lost face and access. Anyone who staged the room paid with her. 1 birthday room, 1 collector gift, 1 month of club access. That was the budget for stupidity. I arrived with a boxed collector gift under one arm and no guardian at my shoulder. Cassidy's badge was gone. Naomi and Riley had lost my trust. Kira was not there. For the first time since rebirth, I walked into a public room without the old protection net. Bad timing. Great bait. At the entrance, the Ember Room host looked behind me for Kira. The host asked, "No security tonight, Mr. Waverly?" I said, "Apparently I enjoy proving bad ideas." The host laughed like I had joked. I had not. Naomi had texted 3 times that the dinner was private, small, harmless. Riley had added 1 message that said, "Wear something stab-proof," then deleted it. Deleting a warning is not loyalty. It is cowardice with phone service. The private room doors opened. Roses covered the floor. Cassidy knelt in the middle of them in a pale dress, both hands wrapped around a bouquet so large it looked like a floral hostage crisis. Naomi stood by the cake with the guilt face of a woman watching her inheritance trip over candles. Riley stood near the wall, already regretting every life choice with a guest list. Cassidy looked up. Cassidy said, "Asher, I love you." Behind her, someone had arranged the childhood photograph on a music stand, lit by 2 candles like a chapel for bad decisions. My scar stared back at me from the paper. So did Hudson's absence. He was not in the room, which made the room more dangerous. The room froze, not because the line was moving, because everyone heard the word husband missing. I looked at Naomi. I asked, "Birthday reset?" Naomi swallowed. Naomi said, "She said she needed closure." Riley blurted, "She said she would only apologize." Cassidy turned her head. Cassidy said, "Riley." Riley pointed at the roses like they might defend her. Riley said, "That is not an apology. That is landscaping with intent." Even I almost respected that. Cassidy stood, bouquet shaking. Cassidy said, "Do not mock this. I was wrong. I loved the wrong person because Hudson lied. You saved me first. You loved me first." There it was. Not remorse. A transfer request. She wanted to move her regret from Hudson's account back into mine. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. Naomi relaxed for 1 stupid second. Then I walked to the gift table and dropped the collector gift into the trash. The box hit glass bottles with a hard crack. Naomi screamed, "Asher! That was for me!" "Was," I said. Riley whispered, "Oh, he used past tense." Naomi looked like she might dive into the trash after it. I pointed at the bin. I said, "You turned your birthday into another woman's confession stage. Enjoy the flowers." Naomi's face went red. Cassidy stepped forward. Cassidy said, "Punish me, not them." I said. "You have to watch your enablers lose things. That is more educational." Riley raised both hands. Riley said, "For the record, I was against the kneeling part." Naomi snapped, "You helped move the chairs." Riley snapped back, "You ordered the roses." Excellent, the trap was eating its decorators. I looked at both of them. I said, "Naomi, Crest Family Office loses Waverly, hosted Ember Room access for a month." Riley, "Fairmont Security does not enter my family events for a month. If Kira asks why, I will send her the rose invoice." Naomi went pale. Riley actually grabbed the wall. Riley said, "Kira cannot see the invoice, she will frame it." I said, "Then pray she is busy." Cassidy's bouquet lowered. The room had not turned sympathetic. That was her first failure. She had expected public pressure to corner me. Naomi tried to save it. Naomi said, "Asher, she really has not been sleeping." I looked at the roses. I said, "Then she should try a bed instead of my marriage." Riley muttered, "That is medically fair." Naomi glared at her. Riley lifted both hands again. Riley said, "What? I am no longer standing in front of consequences. They have shoes." Cassidy swallowed hard. The enablers were wobbling, and she could feel the floor moving under her. She needed a stronger scene, so she went for my scar. Cassidy lifted the photograph from the music stand. Cassidy said, "You saved me before anyone loved me. That means something." I took the photograph from her hand, folded it once, and slid it into my jacket. I said, "Correct. It means Hudson is a liar. It does not mean you get promoted." Instead, public pressure started asking who paid for the pedals. A man near the bar whispered, "Is that Hudson's wife?" A woman beside him whispered, "The one from the poster?" Cassidy heard both. Her eyes wet instantly. Cassidy said, "I made a mistake marrying Hudson. You know that now. Everyone knows that now." I said, "No. Everyone knows you married the lie you preferred." She flinched. Then she walked closer, bouquet crushed between her hands. Cassidy said, "You cannot tell me you feel nothing. You kept my gifts. You followed me home. You sent the photo." I laughed once. I said, "I followed you home with movers. Even the truck understood the relationship better than you." A few people at the bar coughed into their drinks. Cassidy's face burned. She tried a different weapon. Cassidy said, "Kira is not here. Talk to me honestly." I stepped closer. I said, "Kira does not need to be in the room for me to remember I am married. Try it sometime." The bar went quiet. A bartender pretended to polish one glass for so long the glass probably learned shame. Cassidy looked around and realized the room was no longer a confession stage. It had become a witness box, and every witness was checking who still had Waverly access. Riley closed her eyes. Riley said, "That one hurt me, and I am innocent adjacent." Naomi hissed, "Stop talking!" Cassidy reached for my sleeve. I caught her wrist before she touched me. She whispered, "Asher, please, I want a divorce. I want us to start over." That line deserved a pause, not for emotion, for witnesses. I lifted her wrist so everyone saw the faint ring mark Hudson had left on her finger. I said, "You are asking another woman's husband to rescue you from the husband you chose, in public, with roses." Her lips trembled. "Yes," Cassidy said, "because I love you." I slapped her. The sound cut through the music and killed the last fake candlelit romance in the room. The rose stand tipped. Petals spilled across the floor. One candle went out. Very symbolic. Very cheap. Cassidy staggered against the rose stand. Naomi gasped. Riley did not. The woman had learned restraint in very specific places. I said, that was for calling lust for status love. Cassidy touched her cheek. Her eyes sparked through the tears. Cassidy said, "You would not be this angry if you felt nothing." There it was. The classic loser math. If I shouted, I loved her. If I left, I was hiding it. If I married someone else, apparently I was doing advanced romance. I said, "I get angry at fires too. I do not marry them." A man at the bar made a sound into his glass. Riley whispered, "That should be on a napkin." Naomi whispered, "Riley, I am begging you." Cassidy lifted the bouquet again like a shield. Cassidy said, "You said wrong leg time this morning. I know you remember something. I can feel it." The room shifted. Too close, so I cut the line before curiosity became power. "You can feel a divorce coming," I said. "Do not confuse that with destiny," I continued. "And this is for my wife. Stay away from my marriage." The woman at the bar whispered, "He really married the other one." The man beside her said, "Looks like he survived the upgrade." Cassidy heard it and folded around the bouquet. Not to the floor. Not yet. She was too proud to collapse before the room had finished judging her. Naomi rushed toward her. I said, "Do not!" Naomi stopped mid-step. A waiter came in carrying the birthday cake. He saw Cassidy holding roses, saw the trash bin, saw Naomi almost crying, and froze with 30 candles burning. The wax started dripping onto the frosting. I pointed at the cake. "Put it beside the roses," I said. The theme is bad decisions. The waiter obeyed me. Naomi looked at her melting cake and finally understood that I was not only rejecting Cassidy, I was making the party itself testify. Cassidy's face twisted. Her grand confession now had a dying cake for background. Very romantic, very bankrupt. That was power moving without shouting. Riley looked at Naomi and quietly stepped away from Cassidy's side. 1 foot, then another. The enablers were recalculating in real time. Cassidy saw that too. Cassidy said, "Naomi." Naomi's mouth opened. No answer came. Riley answered instead. Riley said, "You said he would listen. You did not say he would slap the party budget into another tax year." Naomi looked betrayed. Riley looked alive. I pointed to the trash. I said, "Gift stays there. Cake stays unpaid by me. Access stays cut." Naomi whispered, "It is my birthday." I said, "Then make better wishes." I turned toward the door. The collector gift box shifted in the trash as broken glass settled around it. Naomi flinched like the gift had called her name from the underworld. I looked at her once more. "Dig it out if you want," I said, "but if you touch it, Kira gets the story from me with photos." Naomi pulled her hand back from the trash rim. Riley stared at the bin and whispered, "The gift is dead. Let it go." Naomi whispered, "I hate all of you." "Good," I said. "Hate is cheaper than access." I turned toward the door. Cassidy followed 2 steps. Cassidy said, "Asher, do not leave like this." I stopped. I asked, "Like what?" Her voice broke. Cassidy said, "Like I mean nothing." That was the line she had earned. I looked back at her. I said, "You mean trouble? That is not nothing." Then I left. No hug, no private talk, no soft corner where she could pretend public shame was intimacy. The hallway outside the Ember Room smelled like expensive smoke and spilled champagne. Behind me, Naomi started crying about the gift. Riley started explaining why this was technically Cassidy's fault. Cassidy said my name once, then stopped when the room did not turn with her. The Ember Room host stepped into the hall with a pale face. The host said, "Should I call your driver, Mr. Waverly?" I said, "Call Naomi a trash bag for the gift and put it on my tab." From inside, Naomi shouted, "I heard that." "Good," I said. "First honest sound all night." "Good. A confession without an audience is just noise." At the elevator, my phone buzzed. Kira. Her message was 1 line. "Still alive?" I typed back. "Define alive," she answered fast. "That means no." A second message followed. "I am leaving Langford Capital now." I smiled despite myself. Then the elevator doors opened. 2 club guests stepped out laughing too loudly. One leaned against the panel and looked at my Waverly ring before looking at my face. The other blocked the hallway with a glass in her hand. She said, "Private party upstairs?" I said, "Not anymore." She looked past me toward the Ember Room door where Cassidy's roses were still visible. The first guest smiled. The smile had a price tag attached. I should have waited for Kira. I did not. I walked into the elevator alone, with no guardian beside me and 2 strangers watching the ring on my hand like it had already paid for their next mistake. The first stranger looked at my Waverly ring and said, "That should cover the apology fee." So that was the price joke. 2 drunk club guests, 1 blocked elevator, 0 guardians, and Kira still racing back from Langford Capital. Cassidy had finally created a rescue scene. She just did not know it yet. The rule was simple. Rescue can create responsibility. It cannot create marriage. 1 head wound could buy a hospital bill. It could not buy my wife position back. The elevator doors tried to close. The guest with the glass jammed 1 heel into the gap. She said, "You ruined some poor woman's birthday upstairs. Buy us a drink and we forget your face." I looked at the glass. I said, "You already forgot your dignity. Start there." Her friend laughed until she realized I was not afraid. Then the laugh sharpened. The first guest grabbed my sleeve. I caught her wrist and twisted just enough to make the bracelet bite skin. She yelped. Her friend threw the drink. I turned my shoulder. Liquor hit my jacket, not my face. Small win. Then the elevator opened on the parking level, and a third problem stepped from the service alcove. A man in a club vest, not security. Too big for the hallway and too interested in my watch. I knew the type. Not brave enough to rob a Waverly in daylight. Drunk enough to try in a parking garage with 2 witnesses who thought blackmail was a business model. He glanced at my ring too. Everyone kept looking at the ring. No one looked at the bruise on my shoulder until I made it their problem. He said, "Easy, everyone pays something." There it was. Not romance, not scandal, just the old protection net missing at the worst possible time. I shoved the first guest back into the elevator wall and stepped out before the vested man boxed me in. He swung badly. I ducked worse. The punch clipped my shoulder and drove me into a parked car. Pain flashed down my arm. In my first life, Cassidy had watched me bleed while protecting Hudson. This time, the elevator dinged behind me. Cassidy ran out barefoot, roses gone, cheeks still red from my slap. She saw the man lift his hand again, And for once, she ran toward me. Cassidy grabbed a metal sign stand from beside the elevator and slammed it into his back. The hit rang through the parking level. The man cursed and turned on her. Cassidy did not run. That was new. Stupid maybe. Late, definitely. But new. She swung the stand again and caught his wrist. The glass guest screamed. Her friend tried to bolt. I grabbed the friend's sleeve and shoved her toward the wall. "Stay," I said. "You wanted a fee, now you are the receipt." The vested man lunged at Cassidy. She dodged the first grab, not the second. His elbow caught her temple when he spun. Cassidy hit the concrete hard. The sound was ugly enough to sober the hallway. The two guests stopped moving. The vested man looked down at Cassidy like he had just realized the woman he hit came with a last name and consequences. I drove my elbow into his ribs. It was not elegant. It worked. He stumbled back into the elevator frame and cracked his head against the metal edge. For half a second, everything paused. Then Kira's voice cut through the parking level. Kira said, "Move away from my husband." The vested man turned. Bad choice. Kira came down the ramp in heels, hair loose, jacket open, and murder in her walk. She kicked the man's knee sideways before he decided whether to laugh. He dropped. Kira drove her heel onto his wrist until his hand opened against the concrete. The first guest tried to crawl away. Kira did not even look at her. Kira said, "Stay there unless you want matching ankles." The guest stayed. Smartest woman in the parking level for 6 seconds. Then Kira looked at me. Kira said, "Define alive." I said, "Annoyed, bruised, married." Kira said, "Acceptable." Then she saw Cassidy on the floor. The amusement left her face. Cassidy's eyes were open, but unfocused. Blood ran from her hairline into her ear. She whispered my name. Not Hudson's, mine. That whisper was a bomb with a pulse. The club manager arrived 2 minutes later with security finally behind him. Very heroic. Excellent timing if the fight had scheduled an encore, the manager said. "Mr. Waverly, we are deeply sorry. Your account will be comped and the guests removed." I pointed at Cassidy. I said, "Call an ambulance, then apologize with consequences, not adjectives." The manager looked at the blood and paled. Kira crouched beside Cassidy, checked the wound with 2 fingers, then looked up at me. Cassidy's hand moved toward my shoe. Kira caught her wrist gently enough not to be cruel and firmly enough not to be replaced. Kira said, "Pressure on the wound, not on my husband." Cassidy blinked through the blood. Even half-conscious, she heard the title. "My husband." Kira said, "She needs a hospital." No jealousy in that line. That came later. This was competence. The club manager looked at me like he expected an order to carry Cassidy myself, because rich people love turning injury into romance when cameras are near. I pointed to his security team instead. I said, "You carry her. Carefully. I am not starring in another woman's rescue fantasy." Kira's mouth twitched once. The manager nodded so hard his apology almost fell out again. I said, "Take her. I will pay." Cassidy's fingers moved against the concrete. Cassidy whispered, "Asher!" Kira heard it. So did the manager. So did Naomi, because my phone started ringing at the exact worst second. Riley's name flashed first, then Naomi's. I answered on speaker because apparently Payne needed an audience. Naomi said, "Asher, Riley told me what happened downstairs. Is Cassidy with you?" Riley said in the background. "I did not say with him. I said near him. Those are different lawsuits." Kira looked at the phone. Kira said, "Hang up." I did. Best marital obedience of the night. At the hospital, the medical part took 1 line. The doctor came out with blood on 1 glove and no interest in our family circus. The doctor said, "Head wound, mild concussion," and she woke up calling your name. That was enough. No charts, no lecture, no hallway of medical poetry. Cassidy lay behind a curtain with a bandage around her head and my name still stuck in her mouth. Hudson arrived before the nurse finished the sentence. His shirt was buttoned wrong. His hair was too perfect for panic. His eyes found me first, then Kira, then the curtain. Hudson said, "So this is what you wanted? My wife bleeding for you?" He said it loud enough for the nurse, the desk clerk, and 2 exhausted strangers by the vending machine. A cheating scandal, wrapped around a concussion. Desperate men recycle fast. Kira stepped in front of me before I answered. Kira said, "Say that again." Hudson blinked. Kira said, "Whose wife?" His jaw worked. "Nice. The trap had manners." Hudson said, "Mine." Kira smiled. Kira said, "Good. Then thank my husband for paying your wife's hospital bill and stop trying to turn your marriage into his scandal." A nurse at the desk looked down so fast I heard the paperwork flutter. Hudson's face went gray. He had tried to make Cassidy's injury a cheating scandal. Kira forced him to name the leash. That was the fresh cut. He looked toward the curtain. Cassidy's voice came from inside, weak and raw. Cassidy said, "Asher?" Hudson flinched. Not because she was hurt, because even hurt, she called the wrong man. Kira looked at me then. Not angry, not soft, Waiting, that was harder. I could have stepped through the curtain. I could have given Cassidy one look, one word, one little crumb for bleeding at the right time after years of bleeding me wrong. Responsibility was not romance. I put my card on the counter. Her bill goes to me, I told the desk nurse. Her husband can handle the visiting. Hudson's head snapped toward me. Cassidy called my name again from behind the curtain. I did not go in. Kira's hand found my sleeve. I looked at Hudson. I said, take care of your wife. Try it before she needs another man to do something basic. Hudson's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. Then he grabbed for the last weapon. Hudson said, she saved you. You owe her. I said, I owe her treatment. I do not owe her my bed, my ring, or my future. Kira's fingers tightened on my sleeve. A tiny squeeze. Mine! The nurse at the counter looked at Hudson like she had just watched a man argue with a bill and lose. Kira tugged once. We left. The hallway behind us filled with all the sounds I did not reward. Cassidy calling my name. Hudson telling her I was gone. A nurse asking him to lower his voice. The little ugly mess of consequences finally assigned to the correct husband. Outside, the hospital doors opened to cold air. Kira stopped under the awning. Kira said, she saved you. I said, she did. Kira said, you paid. I said, I did. Kira looked through the glass doors toward the lit hallway. Kira said, and you are leaving with me. I held out my hand. I said, that was the plan when I married you. She looked at my hand for one dangerous second, then she took it. No smile. Better. Claim. Back inside, Hudson saw it through the doors. His face changed. The pity mask did not crack this time. It came off. He stared at our joined hands like they were the final insult on a bill he could not pay. The club manager called before we reached the car. He said the 2 drunk guests had been removed and the man in the vest had named the cousin who let them through the service hall. I told him, remove the cousin too. Then I hung up before he could apologize again. Apologies had become the cheapest currency in Riverton. Kira slid into the car beside me. She did not speak until the doors shut. Then she pulled my collar aside without asking and looked at the bruise blooming under it. Kira said, you ducked late. I said, he swung early. Kira said, that is not a defense, that is 2 mistakes sharing custody. I could not argue with that, which was annoying because I enjoyed arguing with her. Kira looked at the hospital entrance again. Kira said, she finally protected you. I said, yes. Kira said, and she still lost. I said, yes. Kira exhaled through her nose. Kira said, good. I hate confusing deaths. Then she looked at the bruise again. Kira said, you need medicine when we get home. I said, you planning to poison me for walking into traps? She said, no. Poison is too quick. I am considering supervision. I took the lemon candy she pressed into my palm. Bitter medicine, sweet candy. That had become the rhythm after every injury. Tonight, the rhythm felt safe. That was the problem. Behind us, in the hospital light, Hudson watched Cassidy's curtain and then watched our car leave. He had lost the rescue story. He had lost Cassidy's first instinct. Now he had watched her bleed for me and still watched me leave with Kira. That is a special kind of humiliation. Quiet, public, and impossible to slap back. Hudson stood behind the glass doors until our car turned out of the hospital drive. His reflection overlapped Cassidy's curtain in the glass. For a second, he looked less like a husband and more like a man counting exits. I did not know what he would touch next. I only knew he had stopped pretending the old methods worked. By the time we reached the estate, the recovery tray waited beside my bed. The tonic looked dark and bitter, same as always. Kira went to wash blood from her hands before checking my bandage again. I thought leaving the hospital ended that night. Then my medicine tasted sweeter than usual. The medicine tasted sweeter than usual. That was wrong before I knew why. Kira always gave me the bitter tonic first, then the lemon candy after, because she said rich men complained less with sugar in their mouths. The tray beside my bed had the bowl, the spoon, the folded cloth, and no candy. That was not a small thing. Kira was careless with compliments, not routines. She could insult my breathing pattern and still remember the candy. She had done it after the knife, after the ankle marks, after the parking level attack. Bitter medicine first, lemon candy after, every time. Tonight, the bowl waited alone, one missing candy, one wrong taste, no protector in the room. Kira had gone to wash blood from her hands after the hospital. I lifted the bowl anyway, because arrogance is just stupidity wearing a better suit. The tonic hit my tongue sweet. I set it down. Then the floor tilted. I reached for the bell cord near the bed. My fingers missed it by an inch. Annoying. If death came for me twice, it could at least respect furniture placement. My knees hit the carpet. I heard my own breathing turn slow and ugly. Somewhere outside the room, a door clicked. Not Kira's step, not Charles, not a guard's trained pace. A soft voice said, "Sleep, brother. You always did trust the wrong house." I tried to turn my head toward him. My mouth worked. No useful words came out. My hand dragged across the carpet and hit the empty candy dish. It rang once. If Kira came back fast enough, she would see the empty dish, the untouched bell cord, and the wrong silence in my room. That tiny sound was the last clean clue I left behind. Then the dark took the ceiling. I woke tied to a chair with a blindfold over my eyes. The air smelled like wet wood, old smoke, and dust that had survived better families than ours. Rope bit my wrists. My ankles were bound to chair legs. My mouth was not gagged. That meant someone wanted a conversation before murder. Vanity. My favorite villain disease. A board creaked in front of me. Hudson said, "Do you remember this place?" I did. Harbor Gate Orphan Home. Even through the blindfold, I knew it from the smell. Rain in old walls, cheap cleaner, rusted radiators, a childhood rescue Cassidy had worshipped wrong for years. Hudson pulled off the blindfold. His face stood inches from mine, and for the first time in this life, he did not bother looking pitiful. No wet eyes, no trembling mouth, no soft brother act, just hate. Honestly, it suited him better. Less foundation, more truth. Behind him, 3 men stood near the broken classroom door. One driver by the window, one older kidnapper with a scarred hand, one younger kidnapper who kept looking at my ring like it had started breathing. Gasoline cans sat near the wall, not open yet. That was the timer. An old Harbor Gate banner hung crooked above the board. The words were faded, but the place still had its old talent. It made children feel grateful for scraps and adults feel noble for donating them. Perfect stage for Hudson. He had spent his life turning pity into rent. A metal bucket sat under a roof leak. Rain tapped into it from somewhere above us. Drip, drip, drip. The sound made the room feel patient. The fire was not. Hudson saw me looking, then he lifted his hand. A lemon candy sat between 2 fingers. Still wrapped. Still mine. Hudson said, "Your wife panicked when she could not find this. Charming habit. I almost understand why you like her." The younger kidnapper looked at the candy like even he knew stealing sugar from a wife routine was bad luck. I said, "You kidnapped me and still opened with jealousy over candy. Strong villain brand." Hudson threw the candy at my chest. It bounced off my shirt and landed near the chair leg. Hudson said, "Do not worry, we are not there yet. I waited years to speak without you buying the room." I flexed my wrists against the rope. I said, "Then speak faster. You rented a terrible room." The younger kidnapper blinked. The older kidnapper almost smiled. Hudson did not. He walked behind me and tightened one rope until my fingers tingled. Hudson said, "Still funny?" I looked at the younger kidnapper. I said, "Ask him after he explains why he needed 3 men and drugged medicine to beat someone recovering from a parking garage." The younger kidnapper looked away. That was enough. Shame does not need applause. It only needs one witness to stop believing the costume. Hudson said, "You always had that tone. Even when everyone loved you, you acted bored by it." I said, "Everyone?" Then I looked around the dead classroom. "You kidnapped me with 3 bargain extras because my wife left you outside emotionally. Let us not inflate attendance." The driver muttered, "He talks a lot." I looked at him. I said, "Untie me, and I talk less violently." The older kidnapper shifted. "Good," Hudson snapped. "Shut up." Not at me, at them. That mattered. The men were hired pressure, not believers. Money holds weak if fear starts bidding higher. The driver checked the hallway twice. The older kidnapper watched Hudson's hands instead of my chair. The younger one kept staring at the ring. None of them looked like men enjoying destiny. They looked like subcontractors who had just discovered the main job involved hell. Hudson stepped closer and gripped the back of my chair. Hudson said, "You took Cassidy from me." I laughed. I said, "I put your name beside hers in letters taller than your dignity. You got exactly what you begged for." His jaw tightened. Hudson said, "She was mine before you poisoned her." I said, "No. She loved a rescue story you stole. When the story came home, she followed the owner. Embarrassing, but tidy." His hands slammed the chair so hard the legs jumped. The younger kidnapper flinched. Hudson noticed and forced himself calmer. Hudson said, "You were born with everything. Charles's name, Waverly Holdings, the estate, the guards, the women trained to die for you. Even Cassidy would have been yours if you had not thrown her at me like garbage." There it was. Not love. Inventory. Hudson had called Cassidy his world in hallways and staircases. Here, in the place where the lie began, she was listed between guards and estate property. I said, "You never loved her. You wanted proof you could take something with my name on it." Hudson smiled for the first time. "Cold, thin, no tears," Hudson said. "And I did, for years, if your little rebirth story is true." My body went still. He had heard enough in the breakfast room and the Ember room to know there was a crack in the timeline. Not the shape, not the rules, enough to hate it. I said, "Careful, thinking makes you sweat." He hit me. The punch snapped my head sideways. Pain flashed through my jaw. The chair rocked but held. The older kidnapper glanced at the window. The younger kidnapper stared at my Waverly ring again. I tasted blood and smiled. I said, "That all? Kira hits harder with bandages. Hudson's eyes darkened. Good. Angry villains simplify themselves. He grabbed my hand and twisted the ring toward the men. Hudson said, look at it, that is why he thinks he can laugh. That ring made servants bow to him. It made Cassidy's parents crawl. It made my whole life a guest room in someone else's house. The younger kidnapper swallowed. The younger kidnapper said, that is the Waverly ring. I looked at him. I said, yes, and Charles Waverly pays living witnesses better than dead accessories. The driver's head turned. Hudson saw the hesitation spread and panicked. There, side chaos with a price tag. He had hired criminals, but he had forgotten. Criminals enjoyed surviving. Hudson barked. You were paid already, the older kidnapper said. Paid for grabbing him, not for burning a Waverly heir. The room changed. Not saved. Better. Unstable. I pulled once against the ropes. The right knot scraped against the chair's cracked arm. Old wood splintered under my wrist. Small looseness. Useful. Hudson stepped between me and the men. Hudson said, you think Charles will save you? You think Kira will follow you here? She is smart, Asher. She will know you were taken. But this place is where all my stories started. It is where yours ends. He was talking too much. That meant the clock had not reached 0. He kept glancing at the hallway too. Not like a man afraid of rescue, like a man waiting for witnesses. I kept my wrist grinding into the splinter. I said, you brought me to Harbor Gate because you still need Cassidy's story to look at you. Even now, you are decorating murder with childhood romance. That is pathetic craftsmanship. Hudson leaned close. Hudson said, Cassidy will mourn me when you are gone. I said, she called my name while concussed and married to you. Aim lower. The younger kidnapper coughed. Bad place to laugh. Excellent choice. Hudson grabbed the first gasoline can. Now the timer opened. The older kidnapper stepped back. The older kidnapper said, no, we leave before that. Hudson pointed at him. Hudson said, leave, and Waverly finds you with me naming you first. Stay, and I pay double. I said, he cannot pay double. He guessed a $40,000 vase at $2,000. The younger kidnapper looked at Hudson. The younger kidnapper asked, that true? Hudson shouted, shut up. Very convincing financial statement. The room had started eating his authority. Beautiful. Still flammable, but beautiful. The older kidnapper pointed at the door. The older kidnapper said, we dump him somewhere and leave. That is still a job. Fire is a funeral. I said, listen to the professional criminal. He has range. Hudson's face twitched. The hired help had just sounded more reasonable than the adopted son. Brutal room for him. Hudson yanked the cap off the can and splashed gasoline across the floorboards between us. The smell punched through the dust. My stomach tightened. This was not a staged fall, not a wedding blade, not a breakfast lie. This was murder with fuel. Hudson said, when you are gone, Charles will have one son left. Kira will be a widow. Cassidy will finally understand what choosing you cost her, and I will be the only Waverly standing. There it was, murder intent, in his own mouth. No evidence file needed, no investigator, no hidden villain monologue from another room. The older kidnapper heard it. The driver heard it. The younger kidnapper heard it and took one full step away from the gasoline. Hudson had finally become honest in a room full of witnesses he could not fully control. That was his problem. He had hired fear, not loyalty. He said it to my face with gasoline on the floor. The older kidnapper backed toward the door. I raised my voice. I said, you heard that. Remember it when Charles asks which idiot thought fire erased confession? The older kidnapper cursed and ran. The driver followed half a second later, knocking over a chair as he fled through the back hall. Hudson spun toward them. That gave me 1 second. I wrenched my right wrist hard against the splintered chair arm. Skin tore. Rope shifted, not free, but loose enough for blood to slick the knot. The younger kidnapper saw. He did not warn Hudson. Instead, he kicked the lemon candy closer to my foot, like that tiny useless favor might save him later. Fear had changed sides. Then tires screamed outside. Hudson froze. A woman's voice shouted my name through the broken front hall. Kira! A second voice followed, raw and breathless. Cassidy! Hudson's face changed so fast it almost looked like grief. Then he smiled. Perfect, he whispered. Let them watch. The younger kidnapper bolted through the side door. Hudson struck a lighter. I looked at the gasoline line crawling toward my chair, then at the hallway where Kira's footsteps hit the old floorboards. I shouted, Kira, stay out! She did not. Of course she did not. Kira appeared in the doorway first, eyes on the gasoline, then on me, then on Hudson. Her hair was still damp from washing blood out of it. Her bandaged hands were empty, which somehow made her look more dangerous. Cassidy arrived behind her, face white, still bandaged from the hospital, one hand braced against the doorframe. Hudson threw the lighter. The first line of fire caught between us, and suddenly the childhood home of his fake hero story became the stage for the only question left. Who would run into the fire for me? Cassidy had spent years saying she would die for love. Kira ran first. That was the answer before the smoke even thickened. The fire climbed the gasoline line between my chair and the door. One tied air, 2 women outside, 1 liar with a lighter, 1 old orphanage ready to fold around us. Seconds mattered. Hudson backed toward the side hall, laughing like a man who had mistaken panic for victory. The younger kidnapper tried to crawl through the side door, saw fire licking up the frame, and changed his mind so fast he slammed into the wall. The older kidnapper outside kept shouting that Hudson lit it over and over, like repetition could bleach his own involvement. The driver had already vanished. Cowardice, finally useful, had opened the gate behind him. Hudson shouted, "Come on, Asher, let us see which wife saves you." Cassidy grabbed Hudson's sleeve from behind. Cassidy said, "Stop it, put it out." Hudson shook her off hard enough to make her hit the doorframe. Hudson said, "You wanted him so badly, watch him need you." Kira did not answer. She ripped her jacket off, wrapped it around her forearm, and stepped over the first strip of flame. Cassidy screamed, "Kira, wait!" Kira said, "Learn from me." Then she came in, no speech, no bargain, no pretty hesitation. My wife crossed fire like it had offended her personally. The heat slammed into my face, smoke dragged claws down my throat. I twisted my wrist again, slicking the rope with blood, but the knot held. Kira reached me and grabbed the chair back. I said, "Knife, left table." She followed my eyes. The younger kidnapper had dropped the utility blade near the old teacher's desk before he ran. It lay half under a cracked workbook, bright as a second chance. Kira lunged for it. A burning shelf popped above her. I kicked my bound legs against the floor and dragged the chair 2 inches sideways. The chair leg scraped into the gasoline trail and knocked a burning rag away from her ankle. Tiny movement. Worth it. Kira snatched the blade. A flame crawled under the chair leg. I shoved my heel down and dragged the chair just enough to smear it out. The rope around my ankle burned hot, but it bought her 1 clear second. Kira saw it. Kira said, "If you die after making me chase you, I will be furious." I coughed. I said, "Motivating. Terrible bedside manner." She cut the wrist rope first. The blade slipped once because her hand was still bandaged from the glass case. Blood opened through the bandage. Again. Kira bled for me again, and this time nobody in the room could call it duty. Hudson saw it from the hallway. His face twisted. Kira's bleeding hand offended him more than the fire, because it proved the thing he had never understood. Loyalty without applause still moved. Cassidy saw it too. Her hand went to her own bandage, then dropped. No one needed her sympathy now. They needed action. Hudson yelled, "She is not worth dying for, Kira. He chose you to punish Cassidy." Kira sawed through the second rope. Kira said, "Then I am overpaid." Even in smoke, she found a way to be rude. Beautiful woman, horrible timing, excellent wife. Cassidy stepped into the doorway with her sleeve pressed over her mouth. Smoke curled around her bandage. She looked at Hudson first. For 1 second, he smiled like he expected her to run to him. She did not. That smile died unfinished. Cassidy grabbed a fallen curtain rod from the floor and slammed it across a burning chair between us and the door. Sparks jumped. She coughed hard enough to bend. Then she saw the old fire extinguisher bolted to the wall. She yanked it free so hard the rusted bracket tore out with it. For 1 second, hope looked practical. She pulled the pin. Nothing happened. Cassidy slammed the handle again. A sad cough of white powder spat out and died before reaching the flames. Kira shouted, "Window! Stop negotiating with antiques!" Cassidy threw the dead extinguisher at a burning chair instead. It knocked the chair sideways and bought us a gap. The chair skidded into a shelf and knocked down a stack of old donation boxes. One box burst open and spilled tiny winter coats across the floor. Fire caught the sleeve of the first coat instantly. Cassidy stomped it out with her bare foot. She screamed once, then kept moving. Late courage still burns. It just smells worse. Hudson shouted, "Cassidy, get out!" Cassidy shouted back, "You set the fire!" There. Not a whisper, not a suspicion, a public accusation through smoke. The older kidnapper reappeared outside the broken window, saw the flames, and pointed toward Hudson with both hands. The older kidnapper yelled, "He did it! He lit it! I told him no!" Side chaos finally found a conscience. Convenient? Maybe. Useful? Absolutely. Hudson turned on him. Hudson screamed, "You coward!" I tore my right hand free as Kira cut the last fibers. Skin came with it. The pain cleared my head for half a second. My free hand caught the metal bucket under the roof leak. I kicked it over. Rainwater slapped across the floorboards, weak and dirty, but enough to slow the flame crawling under Kira's knee. Kira saw the splash and said, "Useful, do it again with a river." I said, "Working on it." Kira cut my left wrist next. Cassidy crossed the room another step, using the curtain rod to shove burning debris aside. She was shaking, not from fear alone, from choice. In the old life, she had always moved toward Hudson first. At the parking level, she had finally moved toward me. Here, with the whole lie burning around us, she moved toward both of us. No joke belonged there. Some moments are ugly enough without seasoning. Kira dropped to cut the ankle ropes. The room groaned overhead. Old beams do not care about family drama. Fire eats everyone equal if you give it time. A strip of ceiling cracked near the doorway. I shouted, "Kira, beam!" She looked up too late. Cassidy moved. She shoved Kira hard with both hands. Kira fell into me as the beam dropped where her shoulder had been. The beam smashed the floor, sprayed sparks, and trapped the chair leg against the boards. Cassidy staggered back from the impact, coughing into her sleeve. Kira swore, grabbed my collar, and hauled me half out of the chair. I kicked loose from the last ankle rope. Hudson stood beyond the doorway, watching Cassidy instead of the fire. Hudson said, "Cassidy, come out now, leave them." She looked at him through the smoke. Cassidy said, "I left him once. Look what you became." Hudson flinched like she had hit him with the beam. Kira dragged my arm over her shoulders. Her burned jacket smoked. Her bandaged hand shook. She still carried most of my weight because she was impossible and unreasonable and mine. We moved toward the window because the doorway had become a wall of flame. Cassidy grabbed the curtain rod again and smashed the bottom pane. Glass burst outward. Hudson lunged from the doorway and caught the back of her dress. Hudson said, "Do not leave me for him again." Cassidy twisted and slammed the rod across his wrist. Cassidy said, "I am not your shield anymore." His hand opened. That was the first divorce in the fire. The paperwork could die jealous. Cassidy grabbed the curtain rod again and hit the glass until the frame gave. The old room filled with night air for one hungry second. Hudson saw the opening and moved toward Cassidy. Hudson said, "Come with me now, leave them." Cassidy did not turn. Kira shoved me toward the opening. I said, "You first," Kira said. "Argue later, survive now." Cassidy came behind us, one arm over her mouth, the other pushing smoke away like she could bully air. Kira snapped, "If you want redemption, clear the glass." Cassidy did not argue. She used the curtain rod to knock jagged pieces from the frame until her hands shook. No apology speech, no begging, just work. She finally understood the assignment. Shame it took arson. Kira pushed me. I caught the window frame with both hands and felt the old scar in my palm tear open against broken glass. Full circle. Very dramatic. I hated it. Cassidy grabbed Kira's other arm and shoved from behind. Together, they forced me through the window. I hit the dirt outside on my shoulder. The older kidnapper was 20 feet away, hands up, shouting Hudson's name at someone beyond the gate. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they were not here yet. The payoff still belonged to the people in the fire. I rolled and reached back through the window. Kira came next, coughing, hair singed, one sleeve burned through. I grabbed her wrist and pulled. She was halfway out when a second crack split the ceiling. A thicker beam dropped toward the window from inside. I saw it. Kira saw my face. Cassidy saw both of us. She did not look at Hudson. She threw herself forward and shoved Kira through the frame with her shoulder. The beam came down across Cassidy's back and side. The sound was not loud. That made it worse. Kira fell into me outside. We hit the dirt together. My arms closed around her before I understood that Cassidy had not followed. For 1 second, Kira tried to crawl over my body back to the window. Her nails dug into the dirt. Her burned hand left red marks in the mud. I locked both arms around her waist. She fought me like an enemy. Smoke burst through the window. Cassidy was still inside, pinned beneath the beam, one arm stretched toward the broken frame. Kira tried to crawl back. I caught her waist. Kira screamed, "Let me go!" I did not. The beam shifted inside with a slow grinding sound. Fire climbed across the top of it and rained sparks through the broken window. If Kira made it halfway in, she would not get back out. She clawed at my wrist anyway. Kira said, "She pushed me out. I can reach her." I held tighter. I said, "You cannot save someone by dying beside her." She hated that answer. I hated it too. That did not make it wrong. Her shoulders shook once, hard, then she turned back toward the smoke and shouted, "Cassidy's name." The window frame caught fire above Cassidy. Cassidy's eyes found mine through the smoke. She was crying, but not begging. Cassidy said, "Take her." 2 words. Kira went still against me. Cassidy had not said, "Take him." She had said, "Take her." Even at the end, she understood the line she had crossed too late. Kira was the wife. Kira was the one who had run first. Kira was the person Cassidy chose to protect when the beam fell. No bargain, no wife claim, no stolen memory, just the first clean thing she had given me in 2 lifetimes. Then the smoke swallowed her face. Hudson screamed from the side path. Not grief first, rage. Hudson screamed, "No, not her! It was supposed to be him!" Every head outside turned. The older kidnapper pointed at Hudson again and shouted, "You heard him!" The younger kidnapper stumbled out of the smoke behind him, coughing and raising both hands. The younger kidnapper shouted, "He paid us to grab him! He lit it himself! He said the father would have one son left!" Hudson looked around, and for the first time that night nobody was performing for him. Responders reached the gate seconds later. Fire crews pushed through the broken fence. Police followed the smoke and the screaming. They did not solve the scene. They arrived after Kira ran in, after Cassidy chose, after Hudson said the rotten truth himself. All they did was lock the door behind his collapse. Hudson fought the first officer who grabbed him. Hudson yelled, "She came back for me! She was supposed to come back for me!" Kira coughed against my chest, then tried again to stand. Her hand dug into my shirt. Kira said, "Cassidy is inside. Move!" A firefighter held her back with one arm and rushed past us with two others. Kira nearly bit him. I would have helped, but my legs folded. The ground tilted under me. Smoke had filled my lungs and pain had made a second home in my ribs. Before I went down, I saw Hudson on his knees outside Harbor Gate, wrists pinned behind his back, face streaked black from smoke and humiliation. He stared at the burning window like the fire had robbed him personally. He had wanted me dead. He had killed the only woman who still looked at his name and remembered love. That was not justice yet. It was worse for him. It was consequence with witnesses. Kira's hands caught my face. Kira said, "Asher, stay with me." I tried to answer. My throat gave me smoke. The last thing I saw before the dark came back was Kira's Waverly ribbon, burned at one edge but still pinned to her shoulder. Still hers, still there. I thought surviving would be the final answer. I was wrong. When I opened my eyes again, guilt was already sitting between me and my wife. Cassidy died saving us. I did not make her my wife in death. That was the line I had to hold. Guilt is sneaky. It dresses like honor, sits beside your hospital bed, and waits for you to confuse a debt with a marriage. The rule after the fire was simple. Cassidy's final act deserved truth. It did not get to rewrite my choice. One cleared suite. One Waverly ring. One wife recognition moment. No second ending for the wrong woman. I woke in a hospital room with smoke in my lungs, bandages on both wrists, and Kira sitting 3 feet too far from the bed. That distance annoyed me before the pain did. Her hands were wrapped. One cheek had a burn near the jaw. The Waverly ribbon from the wedding lay on the side table, blackened at one edge. She saw me looking at it. Kira said, "It survived better than your judgment." Her voice was dry. Her eyes were not. I tried to sit up. My ribs rejected democracy. Kira stood at once, then stopped herself before touching me. That little stop hurt worse than the smoke. I said, "Come here," Kira said. "Do not give orders with hospital breath. It is unattractive." I said, "Come here anyway." She came one step. "Not enough," Kira said. "Cassidy died." I said, "I know." Some details I had seen. The beam. Her hand. The smoke. Kira later told me the rest. The firefighter reached Cassidy after the room had already given up. Hudson fought the handcuffs until he vomited smoke. The older kidnapper repeated Hudson's confession to anyone with a badge. Fear had finally become useful. Those were locks on consequences. They were not the payoff. The payoff had happened when Kira ran in and Cassidy pushed us both out. Kira's hand tightened around the bed rail. Kira said, "She told you to take me." I said, "She did." Kira looked away. Kira said, "That sounds like permission from a dead woman. I hate it." Good! Jealousy meant she was still fighting for the spot, even from 3 feet away. I lifted my bandaged hand. It barely moved. I said, "Kira." She looked back. I said, "Cassidy saved our lives. She does not get our marriage." Her face changed. Small, dangerous, real, I continued. I am grateful to her. I am not returning to her. Not in memory, not in guilt, not in some tragic little upgrade she did not earn until the last minute. Kira's mouth trembled once. She hated that. She also needed it. Kira said, "You make death sound like a contract dispute." I said, "You married me. Read the terms." She laughed once and wiped it away before it became crying. Then she finally sat on the edge of the bed. Her shoulder touched mine. That was better medicine than anything in the room. A nurse opened the door, saw Kira's face, and quietly backed out with the tray. Smart woman. Some injuries need gauze. Some need the wife to stop sitting 3 feet away. Charles came in an hour later. No ceremony, no doctor parade, just my father with smoke still on his coat and a face carved from one bad night too many. He looked at Kira first. Charles said, "Mrs. Waverly." Kira went still. Not Kira, not Langford, not guardian candidate. Mrs. Waverly. The title landed in a hospital room with burned hands and ugly lighting, and it still hit harder than a ballroom. I said, "Again, she likes consistency." Kira hissed, "Asher." Charles, to his credit, did not smile. Charles said, "Mrs. Waverly, the estate staff are waiting for your instructions before moving your rooms back to the main suite." Kira blinked. There it was, not comfort, authority. The staff had waited for her, not around her. Kira said, "My instructions?" Charles looked at me. I nodded, then I looked at Kira. I told Kira, "You ran into fire for this family, start bossing it around." Her eyes sharpened. There she was. Kira said, "Fine, first instruction, no one brings him medicine without candy again. I do not care if the candy has to be guarded by 3 people and a tax lawyer." Charles said, "Done." "Without the tax lawyer," I said, "coward." Kira squeezed my fingers until pain sparked. "Patient," she said, "not commentator." The door opened before Charles answered. Mr. Beaumont stood there with Mrs. Beaumont behind him. Cassidy's parents looked smaller without the Waverly furniture around them. Grief had done some of it. Panic had done the rest. Mrs. Beaumont's eyes were red. Mr. Beaumont's eyes went to Charles first, then to me, then to Kira's hand in mine. Of course he looked at the hand. Men like him always find the current access point. Mr. Beaumont said, "Asher, Cassidy died saving you, saving both of you." I said, "She did." His throat worked. Mr. Beaumont said, "Beaumont Group should not be punished for Hudson's crime. Cassidy paid enough." Kira's fingers stopped moving. There it was. A dead daughter turned into a negotiation before the flowers cooled. Even Charles looked disgusted. Mrs. Beaumont whispered, "Stop." Mr. Beaumont did not. He was already falling and still reaching for my sleeve. I said, "Cassidy's courage belongs to Cassidy, not Beaumont Group." His face tightened. I continued, "Her final act gets respect. Your company gets nothing from her body." Mrs. Beaumont covered her mouth. Kira looked at me then, not with softness, with recognition. That mattered. I was not punishing Cassidy through her parents. I was refusing to let her last clean act become another Beaumont invoice. Mr. Beaumont tried one more time. Mr. Beaumont said, "She loved you." I said, "Too late, and not better than my wife." The room went quiet. Kira's hand tightened around mine again. Charles stepped toward the door. Charles said, "Mrs. Beaumont, you may send Cassidy's personal requests through my office. Mr. Beaumont, if you mention corporate access beside your daughter's death again, you will not enter a Waverly property while I am alive." That locked it. Not as the scene's turn. The turn was already mine. Charles just shut the door politely enough to hurt. Mrs. Beaumont left crying. Mr. Beaumont left counting what crying had cost him. 2 days later, I went back to the Waverly estate. I did not go to a funeral scene for the audience to watch me look noble. Cassidy was mourned. Flowers were sent. Her final action was named honestly. Then I walked to Hudson's suite, because the house still had one rotten room. The staff lined the hall when I arrived. Not many. Enough. A housekeeper saw Kira at my side and corrected herself before I said a word. The housekeeper said, "Mrs. Waverly, the movers are ready." Kira stopped. I smiled. I said, "They learn fast when arson improves the syllabus." Kira said, "Do not joke in hallways with burn marks." I said, "I am coping terribly." Kira said, "I noticed." The door to Hudson's suite opened. For years that room had been a shrine to pity. Soft blankets, better views, clothes Charles bought because Hudson looked thin at the right time. Gifts Cassidy had sent when she wanted to feel loyal without checking facts. Now movers carried it out piece by piece. No speeches, no childhood montage, just removal. Hudson's framed writing photo went first, then the suits, then the desk where he had written fake apologies neat enough to fool busy people. Then a box of unused Guardian badges he had collected like he belonged to the system without earning a single bruise for me. Kira saw the badges and went cold. Kira said, "Trash." The mover looked at me. I said, "You heard Mrs. Waverly." The mover changed direction at once. That was the final status shift. Before, Kira had been the rival they tolerated because I chose her. After Harbor Gate, staff waited for her instruction before mine finished echoing. Hudson lost the room in silence. No hidden softness left to perform for him, no Cassidy running first, no father pretending pity was the same as inheritance. Charles stood behind us. Charles said, "Hudson's household access is removed. His Waverly accounts are frozen. His name will not sit beside yours in this house again." I looked at the emptying suite. I said, "Good, he wanted my place. Let him keep the vacancy." Kira did not laugh. She took my hand instead. In the open doorway, the burned edge of her ribbon showed under her coat. The housekeeper returned with a small tray. On it sat my Waverly ring, cleaned after Harbor Gate, and Kira's matching ring polished beside it. The housekeeper offered the tray to me first out of old habit. The hallway went very still. Staff noticed tiny mistakes when the hierarchy changes. The housekeeper noticed hers before I even lifted an eyebrow. Then she looked at Kira and corrected the angle. "Mrs. Waverly," the housekeeper said, "your ring." Kira stared at the tray. For once, she had no insult ready. Tragic. I considered checking her pulse. Instead, I took her ring, lifted her burned hand, and slid it back where everyone could see. Kira said, "You are making a scene." I said. You ran into a fire. Raise your standards for scenes. Her eyes shone. She hated that too. Then I lifted my own ring and put it on. The staff watched. Charles watched. The movers walked out of Hudson's suite carrying the last box. The door behind them stayed open. Empty. Finally honest. A driver waited outside with the honeymoon car that had been delayed by kidnapping, smoke, and the worst brother in Riverton. Kira saw it from the window. Kira said, absolutely not. You are still half broken. I said, then supervise me somewhere with better air. Charles coughed once into his hand. It sounded suspiciously like approval. Kira turned on him. Kira said, do not encourage him. Charles said, Mrs. Waverly, I lost that authority sometime between the poster truck and the fire. Good man, slow learner, got there eventually. We walked down the front steps together. The same steps where Cassidy had once worn the wrong ribbon. The same estate where Hudson had staged weakness into a career. The same house where I had needed death to learn the price of devotion. This time, the staff did not look past Kira to find the real wife. They opened the door for her. The driver said, Mrs. Waverly, Mr. Waverly, in that order. Kira glanced at me. I said, do not get arrogant, she said. Too late, you chose me. Fair. I helped her into the car because her hands still hurt and because I liked living. Before I followed, I looked back once. Hudson's suite windows were open, the curtains had been removed, Cassidy's flowers sat in the side chapel, not in my bedroom, not beside my ring, not between my wife and me. That was the ending she earned. Respect without ownership, memory without marriage, debt without surrender. Then I got into the car beside Kira. She placed one lemon candy in my palm. I looked at it. She said, do not be dramatic. It is wrapped. I laughed, and it hurt my ribs, and I still did it. The car pulled away from the Waverly estate. In my first life, I had been a loyal husband to a woman who loved my brother's lie. In this life, I married the woman who ran through fire before asking what it cost. So when Kira took my hand and the estate disappeared behind us, I did not look back. I had already chosen my wife.